Maine to Aspen, no audio.
Wait. Maine to Aspen.
Okay.
Ground control to
Ward, you might have audio now.
Yep, I do.
Thank you. Good evening, welcome. This is the Aspen City Council work session for August 2nd, 2022. Tonight's agenda is grant consultant report and program policy, council goal progress presentation, and city council working agreements and effective governance discussion. Sure. We'll go ahead and get right into it. And Alyssa, you would like to introduce the first item?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Tory. We are back today to talk about the grants program again. The scope of tonight does not include further discussion on arts and culture and what we brought forward to you previously. Tonight's scope, we did an after-action review. We hired Point BE as our consultant, who back in 2019-2020 had provided the city with recommendations on improvements related to transparency, communication, streamlining our grants program, governance within our grants program. So an example would be the 3 review committees and the steering committee that was created. And then Point BE came back and really spoke with the community, the grantees, and volunteers to evaluate if these enhancements were beneficial, if we need to make further tweaks. So they're here. Zane Slocum, our senior Catalyst analyst, is here to present tonight, along with Patrick as our strategy and innovation director. John Barker, who you are familiar with, is off on paternity leave as of Friday. Congratulations,
nice. Congrats.
John. We also have members of our steering committee. So I want to recognize our steering committee. We have Lisa Rigsby-Peterson and Mullins with us, and Teresa may be attending as well. And the second part of the presentation, Patrick will really be talking about some policy changes and direction that we're looking for our overall grants program moving forward. Serendipitously, these changes are, for the most part, in alignment with where Point BE came to with their feedback and direction for next steps. So that is very congruent with where we're at today. And with that, I will turn it over to Patrick and Zane.
And Zane, we can have you go ahead and go first, and then I can give the program updates.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me today, joining virtually. I really appreciate the opportunity to be back. I was with you all, I guess, a year and a half ago at this point, maybe 2 years ago. So appreciate the opportunity to come back and lift up some of the great work that you all have been doing over the past year and a half, 2 years, and really offer some more opportunities for change. So thank you very much for having me today. I do also want to note Melanie, my colleague, is here as well. She helped in the data collection and review process and overall recommendations. So she's here as well. Wanted to lift her up, but I will be handling the presentation. So just as Alyssa mentioned, the overall goal was to really look back on what the work you all have done over the past 2 years has been, and any improvements that you've made and recommendations that we originally gave you, and then you've implemented a lot of them over these past 2 years. So to look back at those and then really engage the community further on how we can even further streamline this process. So wanted to identify some of the changes as well as to evaluate them and then think forward and think to the future. So we can go ahead to the next slide. Perfect. So we were able to do data collection in a couple of different manners. The first of which was a survey that we gave out to grantees. We followed that up with individual interviews with 6 different grantees. We were lucky enough to get folks from across the spectrum. So we got HHS grantees, we got arts and culture, and we were able to talk to community nonprofits. So we were really able to run the spectrum of everyone within the programs that you all offer, which is really exciting. And then we were also able to talk to volunteer review committee members. We sent them out a survey as well. And then we're able to follow that up with interviews, again, with committee members from every single bucket. So we were really lucky to run, to be able to speak with everyone and get their perspective from all of these different program areas. And we're really happy with the depth of information we received from the interviews and the participation just from both groups. So I know sometimes the 43% response rate doesn't seem great, but it really did lead to great data, and that is a pretty high response rate for a survey, given the time frame. Next slide, please.
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
Zane, can I ask this question? Just of the grantees that responded, was it just who, did we send it out to everyone? It was just who responded, or did we select certain grantees for the survey?
We sent it out to everyone, to all grantees who received funding in this cycle. Everyone was given equal opportunity to respond to that survey.
And did we find that those that self-selected were sort of any particular group, or did they seem like a pretty good representative sample of the broader group?
It was a pretty good representative sample of the group. Like I said, we had folks from all different areas. We had different, various different funding amounts. So everywhere from the small grantees to the larger ones. So we really did get a good representation.
Awesome, thank you.
Of course. Okay, so before we dive into some of the recommendations that we'll have come up with for you all for this next round, I want to really lift up some of the strengths, because you all have done a lot of work on this grant program in the last 2 years, and that it really shows, and it showed in our feedback from the review committees as well as from the grantees. The first of which was around transparency. This process has become quite transparent from the sort of inception all the way through to I got funding, and I know why I got funding because I know what criteria I was being evaluated against. So that review criteria has been made really clear to grantees and was also clear to committee members how they were evaluating these projects and what tools they were using in order to do so. So having all of those processes in place made this a very transparent process. And there was clearly significant work that went into this and a lot of different things that were created over the past 2 years that have really lifted up the transparency of the process. I also want to lift up something that was really shared within the community was that the staff support was really excellent. I know you all worked really hard to get us some staff in place that could really manage this full time, and that really showed. It was something that grantees lifted up of clear communication. It was really excellent that trainings were able to be offered to grantees, and people really felt very supported by the staff and how efficient they were in guiding this process and really making sure that everything was moving along and really clear. And then lastly, there were a lot of just policy improvements that you all made over the last 2 years that were really helpful. Shifting the timeline was great for grantees so that they were able to apply for this not in their busiest programming season. And you did a lot to align your funding with best practices out there that are really increasing equity, transparency, and clarity. And it was a really fair and open process. So I think you all have done excellent work over these last 2 years, and I really wanted to commend you all for that, because it's been a lot that you've done, and it really shows with grantees and with the review committee, and in examining all of your practices from a best practices grant making approach. So I wanted to lift those up, but we'll move on to the next slide since there's still more work to be done. So our recommendations are divided as per last time into 3 different categories. These categories this time are equity, transparency, and clarity. So the majority of our recommendations do really center around equity. When we think about kind of how we can make this process more equitable, I think the largest recommendation that we as Point B strategies can make is to really align expectations with funding requests. So this really means sort of tiering or right-sizing grant applications. So really making sure that from the outset, grantees are asked to submit applications that are in line with what the expectations for that amount of funding should be, and then creating the space and the tools to evaluate them just against one another, rather than comparing a, say, $2,000 grant application to a $100,000 application. Those are significantly different organizations that will have significantly different abilities to use those funds, as well as abilities to write those applications. So really making sure that those processes are, separated into multiple different applications, and then also like review processes, and then materials that go along with evaluating them. We also recommend that when possible, and funding amounts are stable enough to create multi-year requests. I know you have this with Health and Human Services, but expanding that to all of your program areas would be really helpful and effective at really increasing the equity of the process. It's a great best practice that is now happening in grant making throughout the country. And then lastly, just in terms of right sizing those applications or tiering them, whichever you'd like to call it, really determining what is necessary in an application to even further lower the barrier to entry for these applications. And then in terms of some long-term goals, some things that can't be accomplished by just editing a grant application, we really recommend that diversifying the review committees could really help to further increase equity in this process, making sure that the review committee really does reflect the population served. So reflecting what the program areas and the actual funding dollars go to.
Hi, Zane. Zane, we have a question from one of our council members.
Great.
I'm not sure actually, Zane, if this is a question for you. If you come later, just let me know. But I understand what Zane was saying about creating tiers, right? So that we can kind of match the expectation of dollars to return. But I want to understand how that meets what we currently do. So my understanding, and maybe this is incorrect, is that, the total dollar amount that we would allocate would be relative to the expected return for the community. It's not just that we're saying, oh, this is a quality application, so whatever you asked for is fine. So am I understanding that right? And if so, like, how does this relate to what Zane is saying?
Yes, you are currently. I think what Zane is saying, and you'll see it, so we do go into it further when Patrick's presenting.
Okay, I can
on
wait.
next steps too.
Okay.
The abbreviated version is the application process. We're continuing to refine to make sure the questions are very relevant. And we're working on the outcome and impact report as a next step tool that's recommended to move forward with to council tonight. There will be different requirements depending on the level of funding received too for follow-up.
So would it be correct characterization to say what Zane is proposing here is sort of formalizing the informal practice, which we're kind of currently doing at the decision-making table, and saying, okay, there are these tiers, and since we have those tiers, then we can approach the equity conversation because we understand how they're relating to one another in terms of numbers?
Yes and no. It's taking it the next step further with formalizing it on the application and the outcome reports and the paperwork required, and then the criteria in terms of how the grants are awarded definitely takes that into consideration with the community impact and the amount that's funded.
Okay. So
And just another clarity question here on this slide. When it says custom review criteria for each application, it really means more for each tier? Or are we going to have 100 different review criteria? I mean, or is that for me, that's just shorthand for each type of application or tier?
Zane, do you want to elaborate on that with the feedback you heard?
Yes, I'd be happy to. It's really taking what is like, so you have one application, right, that you would have all grantees submit. It's really parsing that out into what is necessary for each funding amount. So evaluating all of the less than $10,000 grants against one another,
Right.
Using the same criteria. So like all of the under 10,000 would be submitting the same application, and then the review committee would be using the same criteria to evaluate all of those applications. And then funding decisions would be made based on those kind of like grouping underneath $10,000, for example.
Yeah, okay, I got it. I just was wondering, the shorthand on the slide just says each application as opposed to each tier or type of application quantity. So thanks for the clarification.
Thanks, Zane.
Great.
Thank you.
Got that clarified.
thanks, guys.
Okay, so on to, I think the last long-term goal would be to comprehensively support multiple languages This is a really significant lift. This would mean having not only the application available in different languages, but also the whole process from outreach all the way through funding decision to be available in other languages. So really making sure that it's not just a application in Spanish, for example, but making sure that someone who was a primary Spanish speaker, for example, was able to access this funding in the same way as someone who was an English speaker. And that would just be multiple languages and just using Spanish as an example. So that would be another way in which to increase equity in the process, would be directed outreach and then support throughout the process in expanding to multiple languages. So that's it for our equity recommendations. Then we have some around transparency. As I mentioned, you all have done a lot of work on transparency, and this already is a very transparent process. So these are really some minor changes that would really make this process fully transparent. It's already, like I'd say, 90% of the way there, but some final pushes over the end would be to finish the loop, create a feedback loop. So provide both with the review committees and grantees clarity on how a final funding amount was made. Decisions are clear as to how, I'll just take the review committee, for example. The review committee is really clear that they use this matrix and it determines, someone's score, and then they receive funding based on that. But the actual amount, there was some question marks around how is an actual amount determined. And then grantees were also a little bit unaware as to how a final funding amount was given to them. And so just closing that loop of this is the formula that was used, or maybe not even sharing the formula, but really definitely not sharing the formula with grantees, but sharing it with the review committee members of this is how your hard work was then used, and really closing that loop for grantees. And the review committee would you'd be there then with a fully transparent process. And then also regarding the in-kind program, I think that the in-kind program needs to be really separated out from the rest of the process, because I don't think it is fully accessible to all folks. I think people have been applying for in-kind, so they keep applying for in-kind. And it's just easy to do that in the application now. But we recommend separating out a menu of what can be given for in-kind, so that all grantees then know that in-kind is available to them and they can apply for it. Because this would really allow the city to better think about what resources it has to give out, and then for grantees to see what is available without really, then we have all these requests, the city fields all these requests for example, time or event space at Wheeler that they can't then accommodate, but really making sure that the city lists out this is what we can provide and this is what's available. Just like you do with funding, do that with in-kind requests as well, and then separate that out so that everyone has fair and equal access to it. And then our last set of recommendations are those around clarity. The
Sorry,
trainings
Zane.
that the city offered were really fantastic. Oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
We
Can't
have a
see the
question
questions,
from
so
another-
please just jump in and interrupt me.
Yeah, no, I don't want to. You're doing great. You're on a roll. The in-kind piece, would that be a optional subsection of the other applications, or would it be, so it wouldn't be a totally separate due to applications?
Right, yeah, it would be, you wouldn't have to fill out the same information again. It would just be a tack on of you've already requested you've already filled out the application, but here's the in-kind portion that lists out them.
You've booked your airline ticket. Would you like to select your seat? Would you like a meal? Would you like in-flight entertainment?
Yes,
That is a great way of looking at it. I love that.
we have more
Depending on your experience with United.
recent experience. And we have more information on in-kind from Patrick with our next steps too. Thanks, Zane.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the last around clarity would be that the folks really loved the trainings. They were great, but making the trainings really applicable to who is then going to attend them. So as we talked about in terms of tiering the applications, we would then also tier the trainings to support that and make them really clear who should attend what training and why. And then also just enhancing some of the the assessment tools that the committee uses. They have great tools in place, but there are some ways in which to make them a little bit clearer and a little bit easier to use for the committee. So they're better equipped to make the decisions that are in line with the priorities of you all as the council. So there's really clear understanding what that through line is from you all as council to the review committees and how they're making decisions around the strategic priorities that you all set up, which is fantastic that you've got those. And then lastly, again, the review criteria, making that in line with each application type. So again, with those tiering, making sure that the tools that the review committees have are applicable to each of these different tiers of funding. So that's our brief overview. We have a report with far more information, and I know Patrick has a bunch more information for you, but I'm still here for further questions if you've got them. And I know Patrick has more to walk through as well now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zane. My name is Patrick Quick. I'm the Director of the Strategy and Innovation Office. And last year, I think it was late last year, the grants program, as you likely know, was centralized and is now, we now oversee that in the Strategy and Innovation Office. So many changes over the last year, and I just wanted to pause and let you know some of the things that we think about as we make these programmatic changes. Obviously, we're relying on this consultant report, and not only this report, but the prior study that they did for us as well as a jumping off point. But we also look at other inputs here, like anecdotal and direct feedback from our grantees, and certainly our review committees, and guidance from our steering committee as well, and who we have our chair here with us today, Ann Mullins. And also thinking about, as we look at any change that we make, that we're always striving to maximize the impact on the community and really focus the program around outcomes. And we'll share with you how we plan to do some of that today. And then alignment with best practice is really important to us. We want to emulate well-managed grants programs, especially those who are ran by other municipalities. And so we're reaching out to different networks, establishing a network really within our grants management system. We have a community that we reach out to regularly and soundboard ideas off of one another. So we're not reinventing the wheel. And then a core tenet really of the mission of the Strategy and Innovation Office is to foster continuous improvement across the organization. And so we're taking the opportunity to really emulate that behavior within the grants program. And so constantly listening and adapting, as you've seen a lot of changes over the last year, and more changes even to come. And we hope to continue to do that, every grant cycle, to review it and see what we can do better. And so we're committed to that. So some of the updates here, the first one is application tiers, which Zane hit on earlier. And I think maybe, Skippy, this could answer your question a little bit. Really, one of the things that is different is going from one big application to 3 specific applications. So if from a customer perspective, if you're an applicant and you go onto the portal, you can select which request you're asking for, and then it will jump to that specific application. And it's important because, as you know, there's a big difference in a $5,000 ask and a $100,000 request, right? And so as the amount requested increases, so does the stringency of the application itself, including and especially financial requirements. And so we're building that into the applications themselves, and we'll have 3 separate applications here, providing that you guys don't have any concerns with that. In addition,
Yeah, thank you. I read through the memo and appreciate the work very much, and it's a little hard to evaluate all of this without really, quote, seeing the application and to know what it is. So this might be a question that you'll answer later on related to the application. But do we try to take some look at the relationship of the request to the organization's total budget? Is this like, oh, you're requesting 40,000 and your budget of your organization's 45 and you want city to be 95% funder? Or is it a large organization that requests just a little and, you know, okay, now it's only 5% or 2% of the organization? Is there any sort of standard, or would we even look at the total budget and where this request fits in?
There's a financial review and analysis that's done, and it's really around the criteria and the community impact of the application and grant process.
Okay.
So historically, there had been direction from previous councils that no nonprofit should be so dependent upon the city's grant that they could not function without it.
Right, that's what,
That requirement was removed 2 years ago now, when the council adjusted some of these processes. And so that would be direction, policy direction we need if there's an expectation for some metric. I don't know what the methodology would be, we'd measure it by, but if you want that back, you need to give us that direction because it's not in there now.
yeah, and, you know, I'm just asking the question to be able to understand, is there value to knowing that to the review committee members or not? Or, you know, to the community, you know, we're talking so much about transparency. The community will want to know, are you funding 100% of somebody's program, or are they unable to fundraise on their own? You know, does that show a lack of community support for the program? Yeah, I'm just kind of wondering on some of the terms. I don't have a firm recommendation or anything like that, and it's interesting to hear more of the history on it. Why was it there, and then why was it removed, you know, type of thing. But it also made me think on your previous, you know, community impact. Is that just what we measure attendance, or are there other forms? But again, we're just looking at larger terms up here without the detail that you have.
For overall policy direction and guidance is what we're seeking, and the community impact really is on the community benefits of the grants program, looking at defining the outcomes of the grant, ensuring those outcomes have been met, the budget details, the financial analysis, that information is gathered. The evaluation's really on that criteria and the grants philosophy and the strategic focus area of each grants program too.
And what I would offer is that that will be based in best practices, and that's really the administrative function of the program, to come back and report those back. I mean, council's been clear that we need to have a way to measure impact, and now it's upon the staff team to go back, evaluate what are the ways that make sense for how this community operates, and to implement those and reaching those outcomes that the council set out in its policies for the program.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'm just, you know, impact is such a broad term. You know, some people could say, well, the economic impact of look what it serves, how many guests, and that's why our guests continue to return here. And yeah, they have some attendance by locals, but with some of the ticket prices, that gets a little hard. Is that a greater impact because it's an economic impact that benefits the community versus maybe a much smaller program that really is reaching just 20 locals and they're participating and it's helped them with some of the issues they're dealing with, or just provided some great amusement? So that's the only way. I was looking to see if there's a series of bullet points of which ways community impact can be looked at or can be measured, or is it just one way now?
No, it's best practices, as Sarah mentioned. It's working with Pitkin County. They currently do this. There are site visitations as well, as you know. And it would be implementing best practice if this is approved with policy direction to move with the balance, with the impact and outcome next steps.
Okay, and I do appreciate, it's just that the impact from Health and Human Services is perhaps easier to measure more distinctly than the community impact of arts. And that's why I was wondering if it's going to come back down to an economic or attendance or how many people attend or things like that. So thank you.
Thank you.
We've got Ward with a question, I think. Ward, go ahead if you can.
Yeah, I'm interested in the topic that Rachel brought up, and Sarah said that we did away with that a couple of years ago. I don't recall that doing away with that policy, and I'm curious about the relationship between grantee reliance on the city of Aspen and the grantees' commitment to raising funds other than just the city. And perhaps Sarah could refresh my memory as what the justification was for removing what it was that we removed, and what the justification and context was on that.
Sure, I'm doing this off the top of my head without notes, so bear with me. My recollection is, and I'm going to go back just 5 years, so 2017 is when I started reviewing these grants personally. And at that time, in the direction to the grant reviewers, included a criteria that stated that the entity should not be heavily dependent, and that was the extent of the description, heavily dependent upon the city of Aspen to be able to operate its mission with these dollars. And so, I can think of one nonprofit right now where it's user fees and our donation, and there's not a whole lot in between the two. Is that okay? It is a great question. The council, and being a more transparent process, the direction we received was it's not as critical if that's the formula that works for that nonprofit, as long as it's not, perhaps, I think Rachel's example of the 40% of the $45,000 budget, I will tell you that will raise flags in the financial review of the program, because at that point, is it really something that should be a contract for services from the city, not a grant? Right. If those are services that are critical to the community. And so we can, though, with the steering committee, go back and revisit that if the council would like, and try to put a little more, I hate to use this phrase, but meat on the bones of it for the next grant cycle if that's desired. But that was my understanding, Ward, that the intent was not to allow the funding formula of the nonprofits to work for where they're at, but it wasn't meant to abdicate their responsibilities for fund development work.
And to further elaborate, that information, as Patrick and I were discussing, the financial statements, the budget information is still obtained and gathered in our finance department now. They weren't in the past, so you have subject matter experts doing a first line review of applications as they come in. So if there are any red flags, then your subject matter experts, before they even make it to the volunteer review committees, are able to flag it and have follow-up conversations too. So there is that transparent, full disclosure process. It's just the evaluation criteria, as Sarah mentioned, has evolved.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I understand that there are nonprofits that don't raise a lot of money and can't. There's some glorious things that everyone likes and likes to have their name associated with, and other causes that, may or may not attract a lot of donations. And a lot of those service providers, particularly when you go into health and human services, they're trying to deliver services. They're not as good at raising money. They don't hire a board for raising money. They hire a board for real professional expertise on the mission. And so I'm not saying it needs to be one thing or the other, but I do think that is something the public looks at. And you used a great example of when should it be a contract for services, as opposed to, and so again, I see arts and culture being evaluated very differently from human services in terms of, ticket sales versus your insurance reimbursement from Medicare or Medicaid, two very different items. Thank you.
Thank you.
And just so I'm clear on your question there, I think you were asking, do the committees consider the relationship of the request amount versus against their actual operating budget?
I guess we're all trying to look for equity, and I don't know necessarily how best to get to it. But, if you had two groups that both had about $150,000 budget, and we're talking arts now or something, and one group got a $45,000 budget request and the other only got 20, it's very different percentages of their same $150,000 budget. And they might turn back to us and say, well, how come these guys got 1/3 of their budget as a grant from you, but we only got 1/6? And how do we, I mean, not that everything's going to be always equal and each organization has new projects each year or specific needs, but to have some understanding of that so that we can answer the questions as to why this year might have seemed out of proportion or why this one we're expecting them to come up to some better standards before they get a better grant. I mean, just again, back into the whys of it for the public.
Thank you.
And to elaborate too, just real quickly, we are very focused on equity within our grants program. That's a key component that we've been talking extensively about. You'll see it in the application tiers. You'll see it sort of woven in throughout the program. And we are looking at expanding our training and tiering and providing more support, taking that up another notch in level 2 during COVID and our first year of implementation. There were many challenges with that. So that training and support can help provide that equity moving forward too.
Thank you.
Yes, and I also think that there could be room for us to take a look at how we weave this into our training with the review committees, maybe just a highlight or a bullet point consideration, if not formalizing it into the criteria.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to in-kind applications. So I mentioned earlier, we're going to be breaking this up into 3 separate application tiers, but we also want to pull out, extract the in-kind application as a standalone. And the reason for this is because it can be a little bit more complex in the nature of the requests and not necessarily well known to the applicants. Historically, this has been an add-on, a request only add-on to the application itself. Not so much this offering the menu of services that Zane alluded to earlier. And so, we hope to, by bringing some structure to this in-kind application, that we also bring a little bit of clarity for the applicant. And it also, I think, will help us better prepare, frankly, as a city staff, because these in-kind services do take resources and planning with the city departments to make it happen, to execute on the request. So that's the benefit, I think, to making this a standalone application.
I have a question, but I think it's probably more for Sarah than you guys. And just trying to figure out where we want to land when we end up. And by bringing it up, it's not a bias or anything against any applicant, but we know the ARC has not been hitting its kind of goal of 50-50 fees and subsidy. And yet sometimes, like an ICE request from various groups has a real dollar amount associated with it. Do we or should we reimburse the ARC for doing that in kind from the general fund? Or should that be considered a grant that is monetarily reimbursed to whatever fund is really paying for it? I realize sometimes in Parks Department, they're actually joint projects, and it's Roaring Fork Outdoor Volunteers and our Parks Department doing it jointly, and we're all the beneficiaries. But on something like that, I just don't want ARC fees to end up being higher for everyone else because they can't balance their budget because we're giving away something at the bottom. And should that be backfilled or be a cash makeup to that department?
So there's 2 ways to handle that. First of all, right now, yes, it absolutely goes into your cost recovery policy you have for recreational programming. Anything you give away free, someone else is paying for it somewhere else, at least 50% of it, if the target's hit.
Right.
We're going to come back to you in budget and talk with you about the target not getting hit for the 3rd year in a row at the recreation centers. And some tough decisions you're going to have to make about the general fund, and does that 50-50 still make sense? And if so, what do you have to do in terms of steps to implement it going forward? So what we have done, though, with the in-kind is informally behind the scenes, we set a maximum dollar amount to go out from that department's budget. and let the committee know, look, it's up to, $30,000 of recreation time that we can put into this. And this is how we value that, whether it's ice time or whether it's a different service, maybe it's pool time.
Right.
So that there's sort of a understanding of what the cost per hour is to provide that service. I would say on the arts and culture side, the in-kind services is very much about use of the Wheeler and ticket fees, even Aspen show ticks fees potentially, and those have been more of a negotiation. They asked for 50,000. We're only going to give them 30, but we're going to put this in over at the side as well that has a value to it. That would have been costs likely to be incurred above what would have been the base cost that we would have just for providing the service. So the incremental increase of value as a benefit to the grantee. I think going forward, what we're more likely to do is offer the council the option of continue to build it into, particularly on the recreation side, into your cost recovery formula. You could direct us just to omit that, make that an automatic subtraction off the top when we do the formula, which is no big deal for us to do either. And third, we'll probably start being a little more clear about what the maximum amount available is in these areas, because with this getting pulled out as a separate application, it's very likely some of our entities will be like, I want all in kind because it looks like a bottomless bucket in comparison to the competitiveness of the cash pool. So we'll start having to think through what would be numbers for consideration as part of the budget process if you want us to go forward with this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for explaining the relationship with various department budgets. I appreciate that.
I have just clarification that in-kind services, does the grants fund pay for that in-kind to the department that is granting it, or does it come out of their budget? And
It comes out of the department's budget. It is out of the department's budget.
and it's not reimbursed by the grants fund?
Correct.
Okay.
So it is charged to the fund of which is appropriate for the activity being asked for. So whether that's use of the Wheeler, it gets charged to the Wheeler budget. If it's open space related, it gets charged to the Parks Fund. And if it's recreation related, it's charged to the general fund and the recreation budget. Those are really the three pools of in-kind. There might be little things elsewhere, but that's generally the three big ones.
And there's no grant fund that reimburses those.
Correct. These are just absorbed in those funds.
And I thought I heard you say, Sarah, that I brought up to set a limit on each department for in-kind contributions. Is that something that is current or proposed or we should do?
If we move forward with an in-kind application, I think by grant program area, so there'll be a cap for health and human services, a cap for open space, a cap for recreation, something like that. We'll go back and look at what the historical use has been. I think the most expensive thing generally is ice time that is being given in kind in association typically with fundraisers to allow those nonprofits to operate more without other subsidy from us.
Yeah,
So there's some give and take there.
Sarah, follow up on that, knowing that that's where the budget comes from. So a recommendation is made by the grants committee about whether this in-kind request is, meets our criterion. But then is that sort of dominion to say yes or no, or do they then go to, to Parks or to the Wheeler who have to accept or deny it?
The departments don't get a say in
They
it.
don't get a say in it.
We have entrusted your grant reviewers with that authority, and why we give them our informal, if you will, budget cap that we've administratively set. And I think the other piece that goes with that is that we, just because it's in-kind support doesn't mean they don't receive an invoice that tells them the value of that service that then shows it zeroed back out.
Right.
So we try to make it a point to show there is an actual thing they should show in their books
Right.
of value.
Got it.
Thank you.
So in a nutshell, this needs some love and attention on an incremental process and is very much on our radar.
Is there a process to report out what couldn't be done because funds were given away in in-kind contributions?
No, the amounts are so small that I would not say. I think the biggest one is your recreation budget. again, there's not a whole lot of in-kind requests that come into the Parks Fund. And the Wheeler Fund, again, it's been more of a negotiation, sort of how do we support this production or this activity that this program that the grantee is trying to fund, that maybe they didn't think about a service of the Wheeler that could be beneficial to them, that we have in the past offered. And they could refuse it, right? Any in-kind service could be declined. Any grant financial commitment could be declined by a grantee. But the committee goes forward and says, this is what we feel best represents where you are in the pool. And I'm not worried about the cost of in-kind services. I think what we owe you is more transparency on how much have they been and where have we been charging them.
Going forward, can we track the amount of in-kind contributions so we've got an idea? You assured us that you're not worried about it, so I'm assuming that means that it's not a high amount.
Certainly, we've been tracking it at least for the last 5 years I've been here. We know the exact dollar amount of in-kind services being provided through this program.
That is in the attachment to the memo, there's a column with the in-kind funding as well, but more detail. And I wanted to invite Insurer Steering Committee members if they have anything to add. I'm good?
I'll just briefly.
Join us.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. From the Wheeler perspective, it's to offer the in-kind services, as Sarah mentioned. It makes it possible for many organizations to actually use the Wheeler. We do offer in-kind support through fee relief. We cover some of the rental fees, and so we show them the total, as Sarah mentioned. This is how much it would have been with your in-kind grant. This is what it is. The effect on the Wheeler is that it's essentially foregone income. We are not collecting that income from those grantee recipients. And so I'm really excited about this particular aspect of sort of tightening up the in-kind process, because I think it will be helpful not only to us in our budgeting, but also to the grantees.
Thank you. Welcome.
Turn the light green if it's. We're getting there, Amy. Nope, there's a little button. There you go.
Thank you. And then talk real close to it.
Directly at your mouth is very important. We get yelled at all the time.
Ann Mullins. And Lisa is the expert on this because she knows the economic effect of the in-kind grants. And it is significant when you add up, especially for the rec department and the Wheeler. But when we're talking about equity too, in my experience of what I've seen, it's generally the same groups that are getting the in-kind services and applying for them every year. Other groups don't even know they're available. So this idea of having a menu of available offerings, making this much clearer that this is a grant that you can apply for, again, I think will add to the equity of the grants as we're doing them. So I really look forward. It's been kind of an aside that's a last-minute thing to give these in-kind grants to pretty much the same people every year. So expanding the program, clarifying the program, I think is really important.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any more questions or concerns about in-kind before we move on? Okay. Right, next, one of our focus.
I actually just did think of
Yeah.
one. Is there any concerns we should be looking at caps on in-kind?
I was just wondering, based on what Ann was saying and we're hearing, is that you could suddenly have $300,000 worth of grant requests, every Wheeler user, every group at the ARC. I mean, I just don't know.
We'll bring you an aggregate in the budget process to say, from your policy standpoint, we'll allocate up to 300,000 or 50,000, whatever it is, in each fund. But I'm actually thinking by grantee. Is there any point that you want us to consider that? And I'm not asking you to tell me a number here, but we'll consider it in terms of the tiers of application as well.
Yeah.
To what amount of in-kind should be provided. Just think about it. You don't have to give me direction today.
Councilman Skippy?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. I was thinking about the same thing before you asked, and I don't think I know at this point. I would imagine the request numbers are going to go up, right? We don't know how much, we don't know problematically. The way I would, kind of be asking us to think about it is just operationally, right? There's only so many days the Wheeler can give away and still be able to do all the programming it wants to do. So I just would want to make sure that we're not granting more than is possible that would inhibit the otherwise functioning of those things, whether it's ice or otherwise.
Yeah. We'll think about it.
Thank you. All right, moving into impact and outcome reports. This is a focus area for my team right now. We are looking at our network that I mentioned earlier, sort of our best practice network of other grant programs like us around the country to see what sort of accountability reporting that they use and seeing how that might work well for the restructure and strengthening of impact reports for our program. So certainly we want to learn more about how the grant dollars as investments are impacting the community, and we hope to get more quantitative information around outcomes in this report. So that's the goal. It will be tailored by application type, and I'm thinking that I should probably add here too that by grant program category as well, we may consider different outcomes obviously for different industries.
If I may, the other component is this is helpful data for the cycle, the review committees as well. So, and that transparency, training, coaching support for the awards grantees of having those conversations. This would help, as Zane talked about earlier with the review committees, help provide an important piece of information for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa. Also, just want to add to that we want to make sure that we're steering away from, in these impact reports, that we're steering away from sort of storytelling, and not that that's not important, that you can't do that with these, but that it's less testimonial and more quantitative measurement as much as we can. So we'll be trying to do that as we develop these reports, but they're still underway. We're in the midst of working on those right now.
Do we have a sense of when we get sort of the first iteration of that and kind of what this I think is like, one of the most exciting things about this whole process is really taking, an outcomes-based approach to grant making, right? Aligning it with community values and then being able to show the outcome. And I think for us up here, for the grant makers or grantors and the community, like this is going to be super powerful. So what's the sort of timeline on this?
I honestly don't have a sense on the timeline. I have started gathering this week on some examples of other outcome reports. I have a background in performance measurement also, so I'll be kind of looking at it through my own lens as well. But I would say certainly, this month at some point we're going to have a template together.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. And I guess, kind of in my mind's eye, right, you have these these community benefits or outcomes that we're looking for that are enshrined in the decision-making architecture for how we did these grants. And so, one year, one might be, access to, healthy food, right? And so, and it's like 1,300 people were served, and you've got like that metric. And then below it, maybe you do have some of those little anecdotes of, whatever, Two Creeks Farm, or whatever it is, the Two Forks Club serves, 200 people at this thing. But is that the sort of thing we're talking about, where we have like quantifiable metrics versus those goals? Okay, that's going to be amazing.
It will be an iterative process, and it will be initially, we want to make sure it's useful information. That's the feedback we've heard from the grantees, as well as we understand there's a line of excessive information that can be collected. We want to ensure it's useful information as well.
Totally. Awesome.
I have no idea why I've been working backwards on my bullets here on this impact reports, but I have. So maybe the most important thing here is that once we do develop these, they'll be required to reapply for funding for the next cycle. And so that kind of just helps us to, focus not only ourselves on outcomes, but also asking our grantees to focus their efforts around outcomes as well. Okay, next up is training. We're looking at, and Zane with Point BE talked about this earlier, but tailoring it to each application type. And we also heard a little bit from them that the feedback that maybe some more in-person trainings. We did do quite a few virtuals, and so just offering those and offering them by type. And then we're hoping, we're still trying to work this out right now, but we're building and flying this plane. We also have a system implementation going on right now, but we are hoping that if the budget works out, that we can include a grant writing workshop or two for this cycle this year. So we're looking at the possibilities for that right now. In addition, we do hope to clarify some of those assessment tools that the committee uses, the criteria matrices that they use to score, which spits out that funding formula. And then continuing to hopefully give more constructive feedback for grantees. We did hear that they would like more of that. So those will be sort of our major focus areas around training.
Patrick, I wanted to mention when I was reading through the memo, the areas 3 and 4, these two areas I thought were really strong, and particularly the training and coaching for nonprofits to be able to understand how to write an effective grant and be more effective. So I really want to commend you on these two updates, the impact outcome reports and the training.
Thank you. I do want to credit my staff member, John Barker, who's not here with us today, because he's been really instrumental in a lot of these efforts. But in terms of training, do we have any more thoughts or concerns? Okay. And so here's where we really need you to weigh in today is on 3 kind of high-level policy questions. The first one being multi-year grants. So first of all, when you hear us say multi-year grants, I just want you to think about 2-year grants, because that's really all that we're offering right now. So, and some of that is just budget constraints, frankly, and making sure that, we want to make sure the program is sustainable and fiscally responsible. And so just making sure that we, have the funding necessary.
Am I correct in remembering that we had talked about 3-year grants at one point, or am I making that up?
I don't know.
I can answer that. We talked about 2 to 3 year grants under Point BE.
Yeah, but we
So
just kept it to 2.
we kept it to 2
Okay.
for HHS currently, and then we're looking at expanding that slightly, balanced with being fiscally responsible and the outcome reports and some additional enhancements, again, continuing to pilot some of these programs and making this iterative.
Cool.
Thank you.
Correct. So the current policy for the last cycle was the Health and Human Services category applicants are eligible for 2-year grants across the board, no matter their funding request amount. For arts and culture, for community nonprofit, they're not eligible for any multi-year grants. So the proposal is to keep things as is under Health and Human Services, to allow them to have access to 2-year grants in the application, but to propose that, to build in that equity that Point BE alluded to earlier, that we allow for this small dollar request, 10,000 and under, across the board, across the program. So any applicant would be eligible for the 2-year multi-year funding.
How do they request it? What gives them the green light to say, hey, I'll take this for 2 years instead of 1 year?
Well, it will be built into the application itself, and so the criteria itself would not change, but
It's literally a box they check.
it's
Yes.
a box, yeah.
Yes, that's how it is under the HHS application currently.
Why would somebody not check that box?
They could be running a one-year pilot program that they're asking for funding for. It could also be that the committee's review says even though you want to, we think we need another year of data to make a longer commitment. So it's really what we're hearing from the HHS applicants and in turn from the community nonprofits in particular is that predictability though of having longer lets them be able to plan instead of cramming the program into one fiscal year, gives them an opportunity to potentially program it over years and develop it at a more sustainable pace.
And I think that's particularly true for human services, but I can see it really working with these kind of growing, smaller nonprofits in the cultural range, because, for some, we can't hire a person for the next 9 months to do this work if we don't think we can keep them for the year afterwards. And so that's what the purpose of the program is, to be multi-year. Thank you.
Okay, any concerns with this direction?
Nope.
Okay,
So I want to just make sure that can you go back? Can you please go back a slide? So I just want to make clear, though, so if it's the request for a multi-year grant for any grantee under 10,000, it can be for any service, but only HHS applicants for over 10,000. So it doesn't quite address the example you brought up, Rachel, for our community nonprofits, but I just want to make sure council's understanding that recommendation from the team. For now.
And I was talking about the human service side.
Right, that's why I wanted to make sure everyone
you.
understood it was different for the other two program areas.
And then as we look at the second year, so if somebody has a 2-year grant, well, let's say there's multiple. So in our budgeting, that will be earmarked.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
It's always subject to appropriations, right? That's by far, and that's in the grant agreements. But, it'd be pretty extenuating circumstances for us not to honor those commitments.
And it would be conditional upon meeting the impact outcome reports.
That's what I was just going to say. They still have the check-in. They don't get to run for 24 months and then say, how did it go?
Yes.
yeah, it's also.
To clarify, so if there's a multi-year for, let's say, $50,000, that $50,000 would come out of the next year's grant funding or grant pool?
If it's HHS.
Yes, that is how it works right now
For HHS.
For HHS.
for HHS.
Just so I was clear on what you were saying, even though a 2-year grant could be awarded for $9,000 a year for a non-HHS applicant, at that year interval, it could be rescinded for performance, basically?
Yes.
Okay,
There are going to be conditional requirements set forth in the agreement.
great.
Very good.
And we could maybe note also that the HHS grants have historically been smaller requests, so that's why we chose to take this sort of incremental step in this direction and choosing to pilot those kind of smaller dollar requests to build equity, but also to kind of test it a little bit to see what that looks like next cycle. Okay, next is a consideration for the request amounts and to cap that at $100,000. This is no change to this policy. Last cycle, we tested the $100,000 amount across the board. And only two, there's really not demand for over $100,000. Only 2 applicants applied for over that amount anyway. So roughly something like 99% of our applicants were pleased with this. This also allows us to broaden the program a bit and to fund at higher percentages across the board. Do we have consensus on leaving the cap as is at 100,000? Thank you. And lastly is a question around location priority. And the current policy is all organizations that serve the Roaring Fork Valley. We're looking at, again, sort of a pilot for this cycle to test this, to see what it would look like. Our proposal is to leave the current policy as is for historic programs. So that's arts and culture, HHS, community nonprofit. But for the new programs, and as a reminder, that's our individual artist fellowship category, as well as the asset acquisition capital materials support program, not campaign, capital materials, not capital campaign. And we propose to pilot a location priority within Aspen urban growth boundary for those two smaller programs to test that for this cycle and see how that would work.
Question on the current criteria, serving the Roaring Fork Valley, but does it have to have an Aspen component, or could 100% of the service delivery be in Glenwood?
It can be within the valley. So some examples, I'll just use Catholic Charities. There's a transient population up and down the valley. Sometimes they're in our community and call this home, call themselves Aspenites. Sometimes they might choose to call, another person calls El Jabel their home. So we'll look at their giving, which stretches from Parachute to Aspen, and the review of their application. The other thing I would say is that some of those historic programs are designed that way specifically because of where workforce lives. And I'll use an example of Youth Zone, where their services in the Upper Valley are very much more focused on juvenile diversion programs who've had some kind of law enforcement and court contact. Whereas that service is expanded even further, though, if you're in the Lower Valley or the Colorado River Valley, because the community's desires from that nonprofit are higher, but because it's our workforce, we've continued to fund them for those other opportunities. The last example that I would just give to contemplate too with this is that we have some programs that literally it's because they take our bears. When we have a problem bear, they take our problem bear and make sure it is rehabilitated and properly released back out. Does it have an immediate impact with this urban growth boundary? No, but it's a critical service to the wildlife population.
Yeah, I guess it's just maybe some discussion around this one. I haven't had any issue with how we've done this in the past. For the community serving nonprofits, I think the value of regionals I think it all makes a ton of sense. My concern is really in the arts and culture, because there is this increasing trend of moving further and further down valley. And, I think a big part of the value of arts to our community is maintaining arts and artists here and the vibrancy they bring. And so I do have concern about that creep of, do we end up funding, organizations that are only in Basalt or only in Glenwood and never do any of that stuff up here? And so that's kind of my big concern that I'd love to talk through as it relates to this.
I have a two-prong clarification in the new program that you're talking about, the individual fellowship to artists. I want to know if that's just for that new fellowship individual artists, and then I want the artists in our midst to opine on limiting that to the urban growth boundary.
That is the recommendation from staff. We'll take council direction is for the new Aspen Artist Fellowship and the Asset and Acquisition AAA Assistance Divisions. Presented on July 5th. Do not present the same challenges and can be more easily refined to be restricted to the Aspen urban growth boundary.
Also, I just want to point out that when we were thinking about this, we felt that by piloting this with the individual artist fellowship, that it is an effort to try to keep the dollars, the investment dollars, with the individual artists in Aspen, with materials in Aspen, with facilities in Aspen.
Let me just, Ann Mullins again, address Tippy's, but overall, this has been a discussion point for years. Even to the point where one year we restricted grant approval to only organizations that 60% of their clients were Aspen residents. and it was not workable. It just, we couldn't find one application that we could give a grant to under that criteria. So it becomes very complicated. Sarah gave some great examples of this mix up and down the valley. It's important to continue to support all the organizations in the Roaring Fork Valley, but to your concern about the arts becoming stronger down valley, that's exactly why these two new programs are put in place. And there's specifically Aspen within the urban growth boundary, Aspen residents, Aspen nonprofits that will support, get our support.
Does this, so I understand that this sort of urban growth boundary envelope is for the new artist program, but if another arts nonprofit organization that has not previously gotten a grant comes in for a grant, that restriction does not apply to them, correct? As currently proposed?
I didn't quite understand.
The answer is probably. So,
Okay.
well, it depends on exactly what they're applying for.
Okay.
Is the nuances. So if they're applying for an operational program grant, that is considered a historic program. Would consider, fit the policy as a historic program. So, you know, we're fortunate to have 3 performing live performance venues, public venues owned in the Valley. And there's actually more than those, but 3 of them that I can think that are publicly or nonprofit owned. And the question really comes is if there's a significant need at one of those nonprofits that's related to this capital materials, maybe it's for instruction, what this policy would say is no to those that are outside the urban growth boundary, that you would not meet eligibility to come in. It does not prevent them from coming in on a more of a programmatic side of the way the materials are, sorry, the way the buckets of money are structured, so to speak. And that I believe is fair from the sense of you're not saying no to these down valley folks, but you're saying our first priority for these new programs are going to be testing them in our own waters before we start sending that money out of county. There is some need to make sure we ensure that we meet some nexus in our grant dollars and where they're going. And so this is a way for us with the new programs to first test nexus and see what's necessary and what response we get to say, should that boundary be bigger, tighter? We need some time.
I agree with the direction and what you've said, and the example I was thinking of more was Mountain Family Communities, and that's not in the arts, but they take all the Medicare and Medicaid patients who Upper Valley people won't take, and they were able to build a facility in Basalt, and so it's really important. And you know, we don't have the exact numbers. I'd love, as I've been emailing Sarah about a little bit, and we'll talk later, our new policy analyst, to my mind, has to get a really good grasp of what circumstances are now, so we can make the right decisions on transportation or housing or things like that. But, you know, we're just not going to have all the facilities here, and especially under HHS. But I recognize the competition element and potential draining of our arts to support other Valley arts. But I don't think it's an issue now. It's maybe something for people to keep their eyes on. It'd be nice if any of those facilities that got some funding would do a performance up here, but otherwise, I know that at least 50, 60% of our workforce is living, maybe 70%, in those down valley regions, and that's their entertainment and their ability to do something close to home and, you know, things like that. But, you know, this really is going to bring up larger questions that I'm literally dealing with, or we're starting to deal with on APSHA, of people questioning who should be in housing, and shouldn't it be just, quote, essential or priority people? And do artists fall in on that list if you have to compare them to plumbers and electricians? I don't know, but I'd agree with that. But, you know, as we're seeing this new momentum to rethink the housing program and prioritize exactly the right workers that we need, this is a little in conflict. You know, how many hours a week does an artist work? How do they prove their hours? How do they prove these things? So I'm fine with it, and I'm all for it. But I just wanted to say there's other questions that are coming up that might be in conflict or try to defeat this aspect that, you know, who needs art? We need restaurant servers and dishwashers.
I think we need art.
I do, I know, I'm just starting to hear that, though. How do you prove your hours?
Yeah,
How
and
do
just to
you
be clear, I
prove?
was not talking about the other two buckets. It's just the art bucket that I'm understanding. I very much support our support of valley-wide services, all the things. I think it's an incredible service to our entire community, our workforce, the region, all that. I just think, the sort of defunct community becomes cool when the artists move in, and the cool community dies when the artists move out. And so, our opportunity, and I think the one we've gotten, is to expand that, and I want to make sure we're keeping that in Aspen, not to the exclusion of the rest of the valley, but I want to make sure that we're doing that as well. So as we go forward, I'll want to kind of understand, where is this stuff landing? And I'm not saying we have a problem now, but I do see one that will emerge.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we were looking at this as a pilot for sure, and I think it will be a good use case once we collect information from this cycle without, doing this with the entire program. We're just focusing on a couple of these smaller new programs to see how it goes, so we can come back with more information. Okay. Just to kind of wrap up here, some of the things that we've talked about are multiple application tiers, specifically 3, small, medium, and large, in-kind as a standalone application, and we are in the midst of working on impact and outcome reports right now and hope to have some sort of information, at least a template, sometime this month. I don't know when we will come back. I don't know if we will be able to come back this month, but certainly soon.
Yeah, I think we'd talk about, I don't know that we have a lot that needs to come back to council other than the financial decision. I think we have a lot of really clear direction tonight.
And the first impact report.
And to be clear, that's the template to go to the grantees to fill out. It's not the
Next time.
collection of data back from them.
Right.
Okay, fine, but I'm still excited about it.
Yeah. I think we've all supported all of these. The only thing I would add on B is in-kind application changes, and then caps, ? Because we have to think about that. I wouldn't want to have a wide open door and then have applications far beyond what we can handle and then have to disappoint a lot of people. Thanks.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll echo that on the caps as well. Just quick math is something like 92,000 out of the ARC in kind. So look at having caps for different departments.
Thank you. And I think we have clear direction.
Yeah, and these were the 3 policy areas that we discussed: multi-year grants, the cap at 100,000, and then, as we just discussed, the location priority. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
your direction tonight. Is there anything additional council would like to see related to our program or policy changes that we have not mentioned?
I would just say this is like tremendous work. This is just incredible improvement across the board to systematize it, to align it to outcomes, to create transparency, to make it a better experience for all user groups and the community, and it's delivering a lot. So I just want to thank everyone for your work. And I would also say, maybe not this year, next year, the impact reports can be this data-driven, clear, concise thing. But, I think we should also think about a video, putting something together that actually does share the story and the experience so the community understands the ripple effects of this, because they're huge.
Yeah,
Great idea.
We've contemplated that on our web pages related to grants too at some point. And I wanted to thank you, Councilmember Skippy. I wanted to give a shout out to Anne and Lisa and Teresa, our steering committee members, along with John Barker, who've put a tremendous amount of work into this program.
Yeah, you guys have.
I
Thank you.
was going to do the same. Staff has worked really, really hard, done a tremendous amount in a very short period of time, and we have a terrific program.
It shows.
That right now, we're just tweaking, right?
Yeah.
It's major. Thank you, Patrick, for
Thank you all.
jumping in.
Thank you all.
Thanks, John and baby.
Thanks, John, if you're watching.
Yeah.
He is. That he is.
I think so.
Thank you.
Okay, bye. It's cute.
Hi, Lisa. Bye, Lisa.
Bye, Lisa.
See you.
Dun 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 dun.
I say y'all stay in those hot seats.
Yes.
I can fix that for you. You're the lucky guy who gets to advance the slides so that you're in the middle.
She's right there. All good. If we're set. Sarah, you're going to introduce next item?
All right, Mr. Mayor, members of council, it's been a while since we've done an update just specifically on the goals because it's three key goals. We have been checking in and working on these with you nearly monthly, sometimes even more frequent than that. So tonight is really a high-level recap of where we're at, what's coming up next, just to have a touch base. And then each of these folks have different times in the upcoming future to come back onto either work session or regular scheduled meetings to receive direction or more detailed discussion with you on matters of importance to you. So if you recall, you had 3 critical goals. The first one was about increasing the number of affordable housing units within the city of Aspen. And the second one was increasing the number of available childcare spaces in Aspen, and we probably should talk about if that's Aspen and Picken County at some point. And then lastly, reduce Aspen's greenhouse gas emissions. We've presented you plans for all of these going forward, so we're going to kick it off talking about the affordable housing goal in particular. And if you recall, it was things about housing retreats, strategic plans, development activity going on, and so we're going to go down the line and have Diane start because these 3 are chairs of different portions of the school. So one's planning, one's building, and one is regulating.
Update on the first one, done and done.
Boom.
I skipped one.
Okay, where are we going?
How am I
I think
doing
this
so
is for
far?
the public as much as us, so let's elaborate a little more.
So goal 1C is about completing council-directed affordable housing development projects. The first one is the Burlingame Phase 3 housing development. We estimate construction is 75% done. And as we've discussed and as we read in the paper this week, we're tapping the brakes on the delivery schedule to make sure we get it right. So we'll have more information for you and the public to come later. But right now, we're projecting availability of units, the 79 units, first or second quarter of 2023. The lumberyard housing development, you have spent a lot of time with the design team and Chris Everson. We are currently 100% schematic design. We are progressing now into design development and getting ready to have a land use public hearing approval process. That we will be ready for that the first quarter of 2023. As you can see under expected completion, Chris has listed the buildings and the number of units that are in the mix right now. Before I leave this slide, do you have any questions about these two projects?
And just a point of orders, that council will take a final look at the development application at your last work session in September before making sure that when I sign it, it is indeed what you want to submit with your developer hat before we switch over into the land use side.
Okay, the goal 1D is about continuing to seek additional affordable housing development opportunities. The first one listed there is the old Mountain Rescue property, and we discussed that with you recently. Jen is working on a study of the zoning, Jen and Rob, studying the zoning and then development options, which we will present to council sometime third quarter of this year. The next one is about purchasing existing units to add to the city's affordable housing inventory. And as you know, in July, we closed on 2 units. What we're working on now is just looking at future opportunities to purchase properties, including, and we will be coming to you to discuss buying a number of units in Burlingame 3. We see the properties that we developed as probably the best value we can give council right now for buying units. So we will be here to talk to you about that, I think, in about a week. Third item is we're continuing to meet with our real estate broker, look for opportunities for either developed properties or undeveloped land. It's just an ongoing goal, but we intend to bring more opportunities to you as we find them. Okay.
Thanks, Scott. Good evening, Council. Philip Supino, Community Development Director. So there's this sort of summary provided in the table here. I'd like to go in a little bit more sort of chronological order because community development's been busy on our portion of this goal going back to the spring of 2021. At that time, in the spring of 21, there were 4 ordinances that council looked at, which amended the fee and lieu calculation to make sure that that fee and lieu calculation better reflects the relationship between development and the fee we assessed on a development. We made some amendments to the Affordable Housing Credits Program, which were designed to sort of optimize that program. That included the historic resource multiplier, where you got basically a bonus on the credits generated from properties that had a preserved historic resource, as well as the ability to leverage things like LIHTC tax credits in addition to City of Aspen affordable housing credits on 100% affordable projects. We eliminated the incentives for lodge development. If you remember, this goes sort of way back machine. We used to allow some benefits for lodge development in terms of reduction in affordable housing requirements. We got rid of those incentives. And we made some clarifying amendments to the multifamily replacement regulations in the growth management section of the land use code. In the fall of 21, we supported the development of, the development of the Affordable Housing Strategic Plan, as well as the council retreat and the Affordable Housing Retreat. We had a series of discussions with council about growth management and development trends in town, which led to council's actions later that year. And we did some analysis on how we calculate affordable housing relative to square footage of buildings, which resulted in Ordinance 24, which council tabled in November of 2021. Shortly after that, the moratorium was put in place. I think that's a little bit more fresh in our minds, but the big outcomes as it relates to affordable housing from ordinances 13 and 14 of this year were an increase in affordable housing mitigation through the elimination of exemptions and credits on residential development. We made 100% affordable housing projects, private sector 100% affordable housing projects, administrative reviews, as long as they're code compliant, and created or changed multifamily affordable that's code compliant to a permitted use in all residential zone districts. And we significantly increased the fee and lieu rate commensurate with the standards council put in place the year previous. And presently, we're working with our brothers and sisters in the asset department on the lumberyard entitlements project. I think Scott's probably a little more fluent in the timeline than I am, but we are actively moving that forward with asset. And our to-do list is, I think, meaningful and robust. A couple of years ago, we talked with council about the multifamily replacement program not program, but regulations, and had some questions about whether or not those regulations could be modified in some way to help better preserve existing naturally occurring, to use Councilmember Mesereau's term, affordable housing. Excuse me.
Oh, no, I saw from Chaffa.
Credit where credit's due across the board.
The Chaffa did it.
Okay.
Very good.
As well as some additional modifications to the credits program. I think just recently, there was another batched fee and lieu request coming from the Community Development Department to P&Z and Council. This is a workaround to the fact that there are presently no affordable housing credits for sale on the market, for purchase on the market for people who have mitigation obligations to the city. And staff believes that some modifications to that program might be in order, and we look forward to that conversation. And then supporting other departments in their ongoing work to help achieve council and their goal. So that's sort of our end. We'll call it 1E of this goal, and I'm happy to answer any questions about our content. Sure.
I had a question about the credits program piece. So there's a part here that's complete, but I thought there was additional work on the credits program that we planned post-moratorium as well. So can you just kind of break apart which is complete and which isn't?
So again, in the spring of 21, we made some changes to the credits program. That's the historic preservation multiplier. That's the leveraging tax credits opportunity, some language cleanups that needed to clarify sort of elements of the regulations. There's a couple other things that are escaping me right now, and I apologize. But that was spring of 21, and then in ordinance, and then during the moratorium discussions, in moments when the credits program came up, staff pointed out that the credits program can be discussed and modified without the cover of the protection of the moratorium. And so we believe that work likely needs to include discussions around extraterritorial or extra-jurisdictional credits projects, as well as the relationship between the credits market broadly as it's intended to function as a free market, and whether or not the city may have a role in supporting the credits in a sort of surety type of way. I'm being sensitive with my language here because we really haven't had this policy conversation, but
I understand what you mean.
Staff has been working behind the scenes to identify gaps that may be holding up the supply side of the credits market, if you will.
Got it.
And again, we feel like some of those conversations obviously need to be had in a public setting, but didn't require the moratorium, and so that's work we look forward to doing soon.
Got it.
And just to add on.
Philip, this is Ward. I'm wondering, do you see any credits program projects on the radar?
We've received 2 inquiries recently from private sector developers interested in doing credits projects. One is more mature, not the developer, the project is more mature than the other. We presently have one application that we're looking at for again, a private sector credits project. I think we're still working through some details on how that application needs to be processed. And this is all good news. And given the length of time required to get through entitlements, and the length of time required to finance and construct a project, we don't realistically think that a project submitted tomorrow could generate credits in less than 24 months. And so with that in mind, the dynamic around the fee in lieu and the availability of credits, we believe is going to continue to obtain.
There's, I think we had or mentioned this briefly, but I'd like to have not tonight, but a policy discussion about the city using 150 or 505 funds to backfill a private multifamily residential or credits program. And also the possibility of city as a developer on a credits program. So just something to noodle on for future discussion.
Those are all topics that community development staff's prepared to discuss in the coming months with council.
That was my question.
Okay.
Not quite all the way, but.
It's not there.
So the remaining item, I'm not sure what happened to the slide deck there, it is about the continuous improvement at APSHA, and I asked Diane to speak to that tonight instead of having Matthew come to this evening.
And I can talk to that. I have the slides here. Oh,
Got it on mine.
you got it on yours. It's too small. Oh, yours doesn't look like that.
Philip, can I ask you one more question while Dan's pulling that up? I found it very, I don't know if anyone else did, but during the moratorium period, I thought it was super helpful to sort of have the little graph of what meetings are coming up so we understand sort of what we're talking about when. And now that we're out the other end, there's this like other bucket of stuff that's the continued work. And I know we have our long-term agenda, but if we could get something like that just to kind of understand which of these next housing pieces we'll be talking about when would be super helpful.
Sure, and I'm going to anticipate the work plan
Right, there's an
conversation.
update scheduled in November on the strategic housing plan, affordable housing plan, and that will be incorporated into that discussion because we'll want some of your assistance in prioritizing. We'll still have staff recommendations of what we think comes next, but we want to ensure that it's informed by your direction.
What a lovely birthday present that will be.
I like pie charts.
I like pies.
I like pie and pie charts.
Rachel makes great pies.
Yep, there we go.
Could it be done? On this one, on behalf of Matthew and the APSHA team, they've been working on voluntary right-sizing with the board. There is a survey that's completed. We had a meeting on it yesterday, and our new policy analyst has created some awesome pivot tables, and we're digging into that data. On sustainability, since January, well, in August of '21, the APSHA board approved and we implemented it. APSHA implemented in January of '22 that all properties are now inspected. And also there was a code change in the APSHA code in August of '21 that gives APSHA a little more ability to require sellers to fix things upon their sale. The next one up is on compliance. As you've seen in the press lately, there have been some high-profile compliance cases, and while we want to respect the individuals in the properties, when it comes to compliance, they are public hearings and they have been attended by the press, and so those have, I think it's probably a little more on the community's radar than it was. And then the next one on communication, Matthew has taken this on as his own responsibility. They've done a number of Facebook Live monthly meetings that involve live Q&A. They've also done one in Spanish with one of the property managers there is a native Spanish speaker, and Matthew speaks Spanish as well. The newsletter and all other materials that are going out are by and large always bilingual. And there's been more community outreach really since the pandemic. There hasn't been much, but there's been Woody Creek meetings and setting up a table at ACI to answer people's questions on that front. And next slide, please. And then it goes to Shirley.
Surely does.
So while we're making this, well, okay, what questions are there? I have one more update. I realized something that didn't make it on a slide.
Okay, you can go first, and
Okay,
then I'll have a
thanks.
comment. Thank you.
The one thing that we've left off the development slide is the continued work on the USFS site over at 8th and Hallam. And I just wanted you to know that that is continuing in earnest with our 5 other public employers. That's 6 including us. And we're continuing through fit test, figuring out some per foot construction costs to decide what would we need from the Forest Service for that site to continue, and what's an appropriate development density that may or may not come forward, and is everybody still at the table?
And I'll
So
also,
we think something will come out of that at some point, that partnership?
Well, that is the intention. I meet with the CMC representative again this Friday to go over where we're at. I think we're getting to the point we need to schedule out the next phase and start holding some feet to the fire of making some decisions about whether folks are in or out, so we have decision makers at the table. We're getting closer to that.
Yeah, just on that, I think there are kind of deadlines in terms of when the authorizing legislation expires and whether it gets reauthorized in the next farm bill or not. So, you know, it's important that people realize there's a deadline, and we may or may not have the same senator in place to, who wants to support things like this come next year. So these are very important questions. Thank you.
I did forget one quick one
Please.
for APSHA. The staff brought to the board an updated deed restriction, and it was a lot of work was done on that. And the new updated deed restriction lets people reset their cap for improvements. So a lot of people have kind of gone through their 10% cap, and also made it very clear in the deed restriction that you can have a new 10% cap. There are no restrictions, no cap on energy efficiency and water improvements and life safety improvements. And so that is available for anyone who's interested in updating their deed restriction. Thanks.
Yeah, and just to add to that, part of that is the hope to attract expiring deed restrictions to take advantage of this. Most people's expiring deed restrictions aren't for a good 21 or more years out, but they may be able to take advantage of the increase in their cap and improvements of their home now. So that's has a dual purpose. Okay.
Before we move on to the next topic, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone involved in this. Diane, I mean, you're just the most incredible shepherd in that transition, and continue to be at APSHA, and Matthew and the whole team over there, Philip, the whole department. I mean, the amount of work we've done on land use is crazy. Scott, the development, and Sarah, your oversight. I mean, this is the #1 community goal, and you know, it is the nature of this work that it will take 3 to 5 years before it really shows up in people's lives in many of these cases, but this is a monumental amount of work in a short time, and it's really going to bear a bunch of long-term fruit for the community. So thank you for everything you've done.
Thank you.
John?
Yeah, I also wanted to thank the team at APSHA and Diane and Matthew for all the hard work. I think this will help dispel the talk of the fear and distrust of APSHA, which most of the people I know are very happy with APSHA and where they live. But anyway, transparency is great. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. And I just kind of want to make a comment for where we go forward, and I think it somewhat fits under our communication goal and potential communications in the future. We now have the policy analyst on board, and probably overwhelmed her already with so many tough questions to ask, both in the city and in the APSHA program. But I've been thinking about this a lot, and I feel like we need to get a fairly accurate picture of where we are now as a community in terms of the total jobs in Pitkin County, Bureau of Labor Statistics, whatever, and then the total number of affordable housing units we have, whether it includes snowmass or any scattered sites and APSHAs. But the reason I feel this is it will affect decisions on the entrance to Aspen and parking and transportation issues and the commuting workforce. But it also will really answer some questions. People seem to expect APSHA now to have entirely recreated the workforce that we need. And they never wanted APSHA to recreate, or the city, that workforce we needed entirely. But I feel like without having those sort of numbers available, and I would just be guessing, but it feels to me like we've got 20,000 jobs and we got 3,300 units, and now people are mad that those 3,300 units aren't fulfilling all 20,000 jobs in the county. And how do you communicate that, that it's not APSHA's fault, or that, while some people may start saying, let's reprioritize who gets to live in APSHA housing, which we're hearing at the APSHA meetings, we're hearing from other elected officials in the community. And I feel like we're all working off of anecdotes, and I said, or he said, or we've seen these people move, and we've seen all the help wanted signs. But we don't have facts to back that up, to go to the community with for anything. And I know it's asking a lot. That would be like long-term planner interest and others. But if we can't tell people what the situation is now, we have X many jobs and we have X many units, and that means we're depending on X many people to come up on transportation every day to fill those jobs. And it's just missing information. We just don't have a good sense of it. And I don't know, maybe it's not the policy analyst who needs to do that, but I just feel that APSHA can't answer most people's demands without being able to tell them, this is all APSHA has, and this is how our community has grown, and this is the gap. And it's just missing.
I just totally support that and agree. I mean, I can't tell you the number of conversations I have around this piece of trust, actually, in not just APSHA, but just the housing program in general. People say, I'm a huge supporter of affordable housing, but I don't feel like, we really have a sense of what we need and why we need it. And if I knew that, I would be much, much more supportive. So I totally agree.
And I think you'd end up with a little less of, well, we're just housing the wrong people. If we were just housing the people who did those jobs, it would all be better. And we need to start talking honestly about the larger landscape in which we work in and in which we develop our policies. That's it. That's my big statement. Thank you.
Agreed.
A request for information, is that somewhere that can live within APSHA? I mean, the numbers that
Long-range planning.
Rachel's talking about are attainable, I'm sure.
Rachel and I are going to talk more about it tomorrow. Some of it's low-hanging fruit. Some of it is expertise that we should be hiring from outside the city if it's for modeling. Some of these things, there are not going to be clear data points available to go grab right now, or to, one of the things we always have to be careful is the data quality, particularly if you're comparing different data sets. And, but we'll work through it, and Rachel and I are scheduled to talk a little bit more about what she's envisioning.
Thursday, not Wednesday.
Oh, sorry, someday this week, to understand. But this is not a small task. I want to be clear about this. This is a huge lift, but I think it's an important one for us to be able to move forward. And we have some great expertise with RRC, with EPS to help us when we get into the more technical parts of it.
If you're taking meetings to talk about that afterwards, you can count me too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Nicely done.
Childcare, well, we're all well looked after.
Just that button. Okay. Still putting it out, aren't you?
Hello, good evening. I don't need this. Okay. I do feel like we were just here not all that long ago, giving you an update on the child care capacity critical role. I'm Shirley Ritter, Director of Kids First. So I don't think this is going to be any big news for most of you. So just to kind of cover where we've been, where we're going, how we're going to get there together. This is the goal that was put forth a little over a year ago, and certainly hasn't changed. So this is the second part of the work areas in order to accomplish this goal. And we're going to talk about these a little bit, but it's going to be more of a refresher for most of you. So we have an upcoming work session that will focus on Burlingame, the conceptual design questions that we want to bring to council before we get too far down that road. We've had 2 open house meetings with Burlingame neighbors. We've had multiple, what they're calling executive committee meetings, which is people involved in this design process from various city departments. And then they have a design action group, design advisory group, DAG, that is giving feedback on the design elements and programming and what that should look like from an early childhood perspective, from an environmental perspective, asset, land use, all of that. So there have been a lot of meetings going on, and we have some excellent people on board that are leading those and getting feedback from the community. So that's pretty exciting. And then on September 19th, you'll see us come back once more, and that's really on a follow-up to the direction that we heard from you about increased funding and programming for workforce recruitment and retention. We have been working with finance, with HR, even most recently with Jim, to try to fine-tune what that might look like and how we would, what we would do, how we would manage that. I think we've come up with some really good ideas that we need to flesh out a little bit that will be substantial and really beneficial to all of those folks. So that's coming up. Everything else in terms of capacity in the short term, both at CMC, at Yellow Brick, those are still in process and with some different things going on, but making sure that the people have all the right qualifications, that they have the support they need from us, that we're working with licensing to make sure that they're going to get through really smoothly. So those things are still ongoing, and I wish I had something definitive to tell you, but we're not quite there yet, so that'll be coming soon too. I did report a couple weeks ago that our intern program has been really successful. That person, our first one, completed all of her education and workforce experience in a shorter time than we anticipated going into the program. She was hired by a local child care program who's been excited to hire her, and actually even before she kind of reached that goal, and we were ready to let her go. But that has worked out really well. We have that position open right now to recruit another person and hopefully run them through that program, increase those qualifications, and help support our early childhood workforce that way. So this is sort of that future about thinking long-term and looking at what's going on at the state level, because there are a lot of changes happening. We now have a Department of Early Childhood, and that has meant some changes at the state level. It's meant the rollout of universal pre-K. The Rocky Mountain Early Childhood Council that we are a part of is going to be our local coordinating organization. So that is coming together, but it's going to mean some changes in our programming in order to leverage that funding, in order to make sure people know about that funding. So that's exciting. The full rollout will be fall of '23, but there's a lot of work to be done between now and then. And then at the regional level, we continue to participate with the folks that are working on the taxing district for early childhood. They have not had a meeting in a little while, so I'm hoping that continues on a roll. They are reaching out to community groups and looking for feedback, looking for responses, and sooner or later, they'll probably be in front of you all to get your sense of what those needs are, what that funding should look like, how it's going to benefit the Aspen community. the exciting thing for me right now is that we've continued to work on a regional partnership, and initially this was going to be Aspen to Parachute. So there were two agencies involved to come up with this waitlist software and be able to not only give you accurate numbers, which would be a really good start, but honestly, more importantly, it's going to mean easier access for families looking for childcare. They're going to have much more up-to-date information about spaces that are available, waitlist information, transparency about what that looks like. It's also going to help the childcare providers because they will be able to put all of their openings on this software platform so people can see exactly what's open, what ages, what days. It will help those programs fill those spaces faster, so be able to manage and maintain a higher enrollment means more money, better able to pay their teachers, all of that sort of thing. So I really am looking forward to that. That has now grown, partly because of the state initiative. It's grown to a 4-county regional effort. And this is happening across the state. So it wasn't a big surprise, but that means that there are a couple more agencies that need to see the demos from the software people that we saw. It means we need to come together and agree. There are 2 different companies presenting. So we're close, but it's a little bit more bringing people in and making sure we're consistent across all 4 counties at this point. And then, the long-range planning is still a priority. We still are looking at needing more spaces, being able to best use our space, and thinking about what this is going to look like and how we can support that, because we are so fortunate to have a local funding source that supports families and childcare programs. So that's always in the back of our minds. Short and sweet. We covered it. Questions, ideas, thoughts?
Ward?
Succinct is good.
Here we go. Hey, Shirley.
Hi, Ward.
I had in reading through the memo, I had two questions. One was that our intern got a position in the county, and are all of our positions in the city, have they been filled, and do we have any, and I think I brought this up previously, any way to prioritize an intern to fill a position in the city?
All of our positions are not filled, and we have been working with HR. They have just renewed that posting, and that's always a good reminder to me to put it back out there through our networks outside the city and throughout the council, throughout the region, to see, because you really just never know who might not think they're qualified and might be interested, but they need to see it again, maybe a couple of times. So beyond that, I don't know that there are any other, it's hard. How do you prioritize something like this versus all of the staff that many different departments need and are really struggling with? So.
No, my point was that it's an intern for childcare for Kids First, and they're getting training to be a kiddo care person, and that we haven't filled all of our positions that are open in the city. So to somehow prioritize when we have an internship program, that the person that is completing that is filling a position that's vacant in the city.
We can look at incentives to accomplish that.
Okay, and then I think all of us on the council have had meetings with that ACRA in their surveys, and showed a very minimal impact of lack of childcare as for reasons why people left their job or whatever, however they slice that up. And I just want, I want assurances that this is still a valid thing, and that a valid need, and that we're pursuing a $10 million capital project. And I want to make sure that it's the right place to be putting our staff energies and public dollars into childcare. To me, it seems like there's a big disconnect between the survey that we were all presented and what we based our assumptions on when we created childcare as one of our top 3 goals over a year ago.
Board, this is Sarah. I'm going to take that question because Shirley has not seen that data that you're referring to. I would argue that there's some questions about the data set at ACRA that I take it with a big grain of salt. This is representative of a portion of the ACRA membership, not representative of the larger community that you're beholden to. And so I don't view necessarily the comments that, or conclusions that ACRA staff drew, particularly on childcare, to accurately reflect our other data sources. It's actually incongruent to some of them. And I just, I'll leave it at that today.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
So as they're finishing up, the one,
One more thing.
Yes, Colombo.
After COVID, where are we with childcare in-home programs?
In terms of what do we have?
Are the capabilities for people to have a small
Right.
childcare or kiddo care program in their home?
Well, yeah, good question. It's always a possibility. The problem is that a lot of where people live that might be willing to do that is difficult to make it conform to licensing. So there have been some programs that have gotten waivers, but even right now, the state has a grant for people that want to start up licensed childcare homes. And we've run ads, we've run PSAs. We have one licensed home in Pitkin County. And we just cannot seem to get people interested in watching children in their homes.
Yeah. Ward, a lot of it has to do with the nature of the construction on affordable housing. And when you have a 2-bedroom and 750 square feet, you probably aren't going to qualify for state standards to take 2 or 3 kids in. You're already living right on top of each other. And additionally, if you're on the 2nd floor or 3rd floor, you don't have the sunshine, you don't have the outdoor fenced space to be able to let the kids run in. And so a lot of our affordable housing, although there are parents and maybe people who would be interested in it, they just don't have the physical ability.
True, to say nothing of fire egress and fenced yards and all those things that the state requires.
Or HOA rules.
Right. In the past, we saw some that were in outlying areas. I would say in Smuggler, we had a home or 2 in past years. We had Woody Creek, Emma area. They are typically outlying areas, but that has been something that we've tried, but we have not gotten traction getting people in the right place that are interested in doing that.
Thank you, Shirley, for reassuring me that you are trying and that's still on your radar.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of other places, it works great. And those folks that do that care in their home feel a huge need in the community. But we'll keep trying.
Thank you, Shirley.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
so the one item I'll add on this is that we did receive disappointing news from Senator Bennett's office on Friday that the local funding request for $2 million for our facility did not make it out of committee. Senator Hickenlooper also co-sponsored that. The mayor and I have a meeting with Senator Hickenlooper's office someday this week. I won't guess which day. And part of what we're going to talk about is that I think the Senate, our senators could have done a better job prioritizing their ask rather than putting everything forward, and asking why they did such an extreme reversal from a very prioritized process last year to a very anything goes forward process this year. There needs to be somewhere in between the two.
Yeah.
So we understood where the senators' priorities were.
Are you sure it wasn't that title Aspen on the grant request that got the committee to just say, well, they're rich, they don't need it?
I did not review the audio from the hearing, but if council is concerned about that, we can go back and pull the hearing.
I hear that from the Hickenlooper's office, if that.
Sure, and to be clear, is Glenwood didn't receive their, didn't get out of committee, Rifle didn't get out of committee. I don't think there's someone else in the valley who did not get out of committee. So this is where it goes back to they need to at least regionally prioritize these requests.
Riffle. All right. Good evening.
Good evening.
What's up? CJ Oliver,
Climate change.
Director of Environmental and Sustainability. With me in spirit is Tessa Schreiner, but she had some unfortunate vacation obligations that she had to fulfill, so she's watching online.
Sounds fortunate.
And, well, this is...
And why is she watching online if she's on vacation?
Yeah, turn it off right now,
It's on
Tessa.
there, tell her to turn it
Lori's
on.
on vacation, too.
Maybe we have some
it's on
trust issues in our
quasi-vacation.
department. I don't know.
Tess and I are bonding.
Little lobsters.
Well, I'm here this evening just to give you guys a quick update on progress towards your council carbon goal. Just for a little bit of context, here's the goal up on the screen, but it's basically to take appropriate action to make significant and meaningful greenhouse gas reductions that we are responsible for as a community, as well as us as an organization. Got the main avenues that we will work in to try to accomplish that work listed up on there as well for reference. We have that work broken out into 5 key work areas, and I'm just going to go through and provide sort of a quick update as far as progress and next steps on each of these, but feel free to obviously jump in with questions as they come up. So starting off with waste reduction, successes of things that we've been able to get accomplished to date. We've set science-based targets. We're going to reduce organic waste going to landfill 25% by the year 2025 and 100% by the year 2050. Also looking to reduce overall landfill flow 70% by the year 2050. So very ambitious goals and stuff that we're excited to really lean into and get some work done on here. We are also in our new city building here, as well as the rest of our city buildings, working to really maximize our own waste diversion efforts as an organization here. The thing that I think is going to be most exciting for a city council coming up here in the near future is we're working to update the waste ordinance. This is a little bit delayed right now. We had some staff turnover. Obviously, Liz is no longer with us, and we've bumped Ainsley, her understudy, up into her position and are backfilling Ainsley's role. So we're maybe stuck in second gear on this. We're definitely not neutral, but moving forward a little bit slower. We will have to you by late summer or early fall at the latest an updated draft for your consideration of waste ordinance. It will really focus on keeping organic waste out of the landfill. It will also incorporate a number of other things to kind of help modernize the language, correct some things that haven't been working well in the past. But the focus of those updates will definitely be on organics. Organics is an important piece to us because it will help cut back on greenhouse gas emissions, save space in the landfill, and it's certainly one of the things that was highlighted in our earlier waste study. So that is coming your way soon. Also coming your way soon will be a conversation on construction and demolition waste. Council has provided us some good framework to work within by with the passing of Ordinance 13, but we really want to look and see what's working at the county and what's not working. They've had a C&D diversion program in place for about a little over a year now, and sitting down with them to see what's working, what's not, and bring back some ideas for recommendations on how we might want to really tackle that as a city. So that'll be coming your way later this fall, early winter. And then another thing that I have up here under waste reduction, you'll see it a couple of other places in this presentation, is an updated climate action plan. One of the things that we will incorporate into our climate action plan moving forward is a strategic waste plan, really embracing this notion that waste is not a standalone thing, but rather a very critical part of our success on the climate front. And so you will see a map to get us to zero waste and a lot of strategic activities to help us accomplish that goal. Next, let's touch on building energy use. I think this is one of the places where we have already seen the biggest progress towards this goal, and that was the passage of Building IQ back in April. So water and energy benchmarking and an eventual development of a building performance standard for buildings in the city of Aspen. I think it's critical to mention that without the inclusion of all buildings in the city of Aspen over the course of time in the Building IQ program, there's really no viable way for us to reach our climate goals. So this is great that we have this work already moving forward. We'll be collecting our first round of benchmarking data from large commercial buildings by December 1st of this year. And we are also working to start putting together a building performance standard. We expect to have this to you guys sometime, probably the second half of 2023. This is going to be a fairly extensive process to get stakeholders together. We'll be bringing back that building performance standard to you, and hopefully within the next year or so. Also, the passage of Ordinance 13 provided some significant progress here to really kind of funnel more folks into benchmarking and push for kind of more advanced building and energy codes as well. So a lot happening on this front. Touch real quick on fleet electrification. We were in front of council not too long ago and gained approval to put together a fleet electrification plan. This will really give us both kind of the strategy and process to get to a zero emission fleet by the year 2050, which is our goal there. We joined Go EV City, that really kind of provides us kind of a network of other communities shooting towards the same thing, where we can capitalize on their learned experiences and leverage for kind of making things happen on the fleet electrification front. We've continued to add charging stations across the community. We're up to 18 now. Had to do some repairs on a couple of stations to get them up and running again, but things are going well, fingers crossed for the time being. We've added 5 new EVs to our fleet this year in the form of the Teslas that the Aspen Police Department is getting into right now. We will be bringing back to you in the near term a fleet electrification plan, I guess maybe semi-near term. We're just starting a process of working with stakeholders to figure out what does it look like from a budget perspective? What does it look like from a streets maintenance perspective? So really kind of getting input and coming up with a thoughtful strategy and approach for how we meet, again, a goal that we don't plan to hit fully until probably 2050, but starting with the low-hanging fruit and then kind of working our way up to the more challenging vehicles in our fleet. And we will continue certainly to add EV charging stations in accordance with our public infrastructure EV charging plan. Policy. On the policy front, this is kind of a different space for us to work. We certainly have the ability to implement some bold actions and policies here at the local level, but our long-term success, certainly towards reaching these science-based targets of 63% by 2030 and 100% by 2050 are going to be deeply rooted in changes at the state and federal level for policy and legislation. So we are paying close attention to opportunities that come up. A couple of things that Aspen has lent its support to that I think are really critical on this front in the last year: the producer responsibility bill, as well as statewide energy code updates. So thank you for that support, and these are exactly the types of things that will allow us to have much greater impact as we move ahead.
And just so you know, at the CML conference, both John and I attended the waste reduction that was introducing the community of the producer responsibility bill, and Liz Chapman gave the main presentation. So we're really excited to see her in that role and being able to really shepherd that through. If anybody can do it, she can. And it was great to hear Swire Coca-Cola and all these other sponsors. And the key bottom line they were saying is that we can't get enough materials to manufacture our product, and yet people are burying all these same materials in their landfills. And that's why they're joining the program. Thank you.
Awesome. That's a great example of really trying to close the loop and the importance of doing exactly that. Thanks.
Yeah. CJ, remind me, the race to zero, what's the date for the zero? Is it 2040?
2050.
50.
Yeah. 63% by 2030 and 0 by 2050. And last but not least, long-range planning, as I had touched on a little bit earlier, we're doing a technical update to the Climate Action Plan. One of the big steps there is to incorporate a strategic waste plan as part of that Climate Action Plan. Another big thing that we're working on with the Climate Action Plan update is to make sure that our work is centered in equitable community engagement, something that our department's been doing a lot of work on and something that we think will be really critical to the success of these programs moving ahead. So we're hoping to have that CAP finalized and back to you by the end of this goal cycle next year. There you go.
There you go.
Questions, concerns?
I'm going to mention something, although it's not to add to your workload, but I think it shows the real value, of what we're doing. There was a large article in the Colorado Sun, either yesterday or Sunday, that was, they're finding microplastic strands in all the snowpack of Colorado, whether it's being blown in from El Nino ocean plastic, or whether it's tires blowing out on the highway or coming in from landfills and other places. But they're very concerned about what that means for snowpack melting faster, because they hold the heat similar to the dust on snow. And, you know, they're now tracing microplastics in polar bears and in human lung tissue and bloodstreams. And so all we can do to continue to move away from plastics, and especially the single use or the plastic bags that deteriorate so quickly and become the microplastics that don't ever decompose. So I really appreciate this work, and it's just something for us to maybe use as further enticement to people to think about more sustainable storage containers or ways to manufacture products. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We're not buying bottled water.
No, we're not buying bottled water.
All right.
Thank you, CJ.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
See ya. I don't know why he's whispering. Because he's polite.
It's attorney-client privilege.
Okay.
Does that bring us to our last item? Yes. All right.
Bye.
I need a jog.
Some water.
There will be snacks.
Okay.
Yes, really. Oh, wow, I got dizzy there.
Bunches of germs. Make sure that exists everywhere, and I want to make sure that it includes with the directions, the final check-in before. No, not before construction, before it goes to the department to go through all this. By the way, thank you, because you know, when it goes bad, it's really awesome to be able to say something.
I'd like to be.
It's great. Right, it's the council's final review of the development application. No, but it's real, right? All the adjustments that they established over the years with the physical environment.
I know. That's all I ever wanted. Yeah, it's cool. It's cool.
And then they go through that whole process just like any other one. I used to have a job where I used to tell people I work for a scheme. So, and I said, my purpose in life is to keep the world safe for rich people who are skiing.
Yeah, that's a value statement.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking.
And make them see, not realize all the stuff going on behind the scenes.
Right.
Right, but you are the final check-in before we go through the community public hearing process.
So what's the last one?
It's a governance, council governance.
You guys got all that wooden stuff? Where'd you guys get that stuff?
Well, I have like 6 Aspen
Shannon
packs,
Brothers.
and they just appear for me because they know I have to stash them in every car, in every purse,
Like
in
glasses? Yeah.
every place. Hey, Rachel's having trouble, did she talk with you?
No.
She's having trouble with her Outlook font size is using.
Oh, that's
So
easy.
I
Yeah, that's easy.
encouraged her to
Yeah, that's super easy.
address that, but I would wait till I would not do it right now, wait till the meeting is over.
You don't want me to scare her, just be neck deep in her computer when she walks in?
Well, I want to react, I want to get going as soon as she gets back.
Yeah.
He is.
from there?
No, his wife is. And they had built a home on the coast, on the family farm about 4 years ago now.
It sounds so idyllic. When I was a kid, I always, for whatever, I'd never been to Maine, but I always was like, I want a cabin in Maine.
Yeah. Hey, can I steal you for a second over here?
How much would you have costed if you weren't being stolen?
Yeah, really.
Can I guess what the issue is?
Yeah, maybe.
Is it Outlook font?
Yeah, so I'd already told you that.
Yeah. So it should go here, file in the top left. Aha! Oh, I dealt with this yesterday. So it's a thing called Immersive Reader that you probably didn't know you turned on.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, same thing happened to, I know, it's horrendous. Yeah, same thing happened to,
It's kind of funny that I
Nancy
mentioned.
Leslie.
Yeah, I was like, where did this come from? Why?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, okay, hey, thank
Yeah,
you.
I think it's an attempt for.
When you mentioned it, I was like, yeah, it's coming.
Okay, cool. Okay, got it. Hey, that is so good. Okay, now I'm gonna hit the rest. I've been hesitating on sending any emails to anybody because they look like reverse slide. Okay, don't get ahead in your folder.
All right, I know.
Back up. That's my cover sheet on the front. Come on, guys.
Could figure that out.
I shouldn't have given them out without talking to you first. I thought I could expedite things.
I'll forget what I saw.
I didn't see anything. Slow reader.
So they bring me a pen.
Yeah, cheese crackers.
What did they say? They say like
Cheese crackers.
toast cheese. What does that mean? They couldn't get the legal right to use either of the actual food words is what it means.
Right.
KFC can no longer call itself chicken.
Do you see Panera Bread's getting into the chicken sandwich game?
No. Interesting.
Something I saw was like chicken sandwiches are up like 63% year over year or something. Nuts. I don't know what that is.
Everyone's vying for that Sunday market with Chick-fil-A down.
Big bang.
I gave it up.
I haven't had a chicken sandwich in forever.
I quit.
White House? I think White House wins our chicken sandwich battle.
Yeah, that's probably the last
I
one.
think it's habit forming. People go to meetings for that.
Zane's has a fantastic one.
Yeah, their grilled chicken sandwich is good, yeah.
Thanks, has always
know
had
who's-
good fish and chips.
White
They do
House
still.
Tavern actually has an awesome chicken sandwich.
You have to take all the green, take all the greenery out, yeah.
All right.
Whenever you're ready.
Did driving efficacy through effective governance bore you? What? Come back.
They only cover it when fights break out.
That's right. Like efficacy. Well,
Only teasing.
Ward, if you're back, let us know.
Ready? What's that? Oh. Okay.
Click 2 lobster claws if you're back.
Okay.
Ward? Are you still at your computer?
Adding participation to the first sheet.
Right. Noticeably absent. All right, we are waiting on Ward, I suppose.
Oh, there
we
he
go.
is.
Oh, and it turned dark in the time that we were.
Yeah, that is weird, huh?
All right, we've got Ward back.
All right, so thank you for your time tonight for this topic. This is definitely using a little bit different part of your brain and to talk about and work through some of council's own operating procedures. If you recall, it seems like about every 20 years, this council has updated its operating procedures, and we are nearing that 20-year mark since the last update. We're technically at 18 years right now, or 17 and a half years right now. Hopefully, it will not take us the full 20 to get this done.
Exactly my question.
There's a few things that I've asked of the council, and the council has asked of me that we're getting started on. And the first part is to just talk about how some things are going, or what business processes are working well and where are not, and really just have a brainstorming and a brain dump session about those. And it doesn't mean you all necessarily are going to agree on what's working well or not working well. But we want to get that input and have you hear each other's input and thoughts. And from there, we'll do a bit more work from there about effective governance. And it's something that I have not done with this council. I've not done it with any council in Aspen, but it's something that I've typically done with other councils who've wanted to spend some time on performance management and how to work as a high-performing council and their leadership roles in the community, both as individuals and collectively. And then from there, once getting through how the council works together, we'll get into the council staff relationships and how to best set up both parties for success and how different communities have done that and can bring you examples. But talk a little bit about the research behind that as well. So to get started, I know you all know who I am, but this is a really important slide for me to give to you because today I'm your facilitator, not your city manager for this conversation. And it's important to emphasize that because there will be times I ask you questions that as city manager I would never ask you on the record. And we're being live and recorded by this setup. But I gotta push you sometimes. Doesn't mean you're gonna answer still. But I need that leeway and that permission from you to be able to sometimes ask a little bit harder questions in order to continue to help dig a little deeper in making sure we have clarity amongst each other. It doesn't mean we'll necessarily have consensus, but it's about that clarity. And so I just want to check in to make sure, does anyone have any concerns with that?
No, but thank you for stepping into this role.
Okay. And, you know, I put in there some of the gobbledygook about, I've been doing it a long time. I've been professionally trained in this stuff. So if you have any questions about the qualification side of it, I'm happy to talk with you offline about it. When we get started, I didn't want to spend a bunch of time like doing ground rules and all of that, but I went back and looked at some previous work that this council has done, as well as with other councils, and I felt like these 5 things were pretty consistent about really listening to understand one another's viewpoints. Doesn't mean you need to agree with it. Doesn't mean you need to rebuke it either, but that you are truly listening to each other to understand, and that when it is appropriate, that we try to seek consensus over majority position when we can. We're all assuming good intent with what we say, and that we're all looking for the right outcomes for the community and for the council in this work. and that you not be afraid to speak up if you feel like we're way off course. That's an important voice to hear in these conversations. And then, of course, to stay focused. Now, today, I have things scheduled for this to be somewhere around 45 minutes to an hour, just sort of as this first stepping into this. And then we can talk about here at the end where we go next. So our agenda is going to be a diagnostic activity we do for most of today's conversation. And it'll be some individual reflection, and then I'm going to ask you to go through that, and then we'll do a reporting out process, if you will, from that. And then we'll get into the first part of the effective governance, bridging the gap, and I'll talk to you a little bit about why this particular set of research is really valuable, perhaps compared to others out there around some of these relationships. And it has a lot to do with the background of how it came into fruition. So does that sound okay with everybody as a game plan? Any changes you want to see? Any concerns? Okay. So Ward, I've tried to modify since this is hybrid, but I don't hesitate to be assertive if I miss you raising your hand as we go forward. I intentionally have limited slides for this so that we see your whole beautiful setting there in Maine, rather than you being a little box in the corner once we get through just a couple steps here.
It's pretty dark now.
All right. So this first thing we're going to do is super simple individual work. And there's actually a worksheet for you in your orange folder. It says front and back, so you're doing the front part. And it's pretty clear. What I want you to do is just take a couple minutes to jot down your own thoughts around what's working, what's not working, where's those frustrations or that what feels cumbersome, outdated, about how the council operates and you're in between you as individual council members. So we'll do this exercise again at a later date for the staff side of it, but really right now it's about you as a council. Just think about where have been those pain points and take a couple minutes to do that. I've tried to give you some headers to think about to organize your thoughts. So whether it's at meetings, work sessions, communications between each other, between the council and the community, and then maybe there's particular business processes related to packet or travel or some other process that you use that either is still a mystery or you're not sure of or you don't like how it's being operated. So it's completely okay to be critical here. This is a place for you to put your thoughts. Later, I'll ask you to pick a few of those that you're comfortable sharing so that we can see if there's some coalescing around what some of these priorities might be. So we'll just take 6:38. I'll come back to you at 6:43-ish to ask you to wrap up your individual thoughts.
This is going to make for some exciting GrassRoots TV.
I know. If you want to tell Amy to go home, you can tell Amy to go home too.
No, I don't. Do they have a council thinking slide?
And Ward, I emailed you this document if you want it. It may be cumbersome to use it, but I just, as a heads up, you have it in your inbox.
Yeah, I saw it came in during the meeting. Could you put those questions back up on the screen?
Yes.
Can you elaborate again on business processes used by council members?
Sure, it could be IT support process, it could be reimbursement requests, it could be travel and training related. Things of that nature where there's a process you go through to receive a service. It could be payroll enrollment. Thinking back to when you first started.
It just works so great. It just shows up in my account. It's beautiful. I love that Friday.
You know, when the tax codes changed, sometime in the middle of my term, I got to the end of the year and it's like, oh my God, they haven't been taking out as much as they needed to. I had to go back in and say, and it wasn't anybody's fault, but it was like I looked at my two different paychecks in City Market and the city, and one took this much out federally and one took out that much. I got real lucky. I got like a $16 refund that year. And it was only because I'd paid taxes on retirement withdrawals. But, you know, so there's some things that, you know, I wouldn't have known that for the next year. You know, make sure enough is deducted up front.
So maybe we'll take about 1 more minute to wrap up the cumbersome and outdated. Doesn't mean you can't continue to add to your notes as we go through discussion.
We're just doing the front side?
Yep, we're just going to do the front right now. I think we'll just about wrap it up here. And what we're going to do is I'm going to stop sharing screen, and Diane will be picking it up. I'm going to ask you to go through what you wrote down and circle your top 3 to 5 items on there. And if you don't have 3, that's okay. But I suspect you all have at least 3 things that you wrote down on those sheets. What are your top 3? Because those are the ones you'll share with your fellow counselors.
Top 3 from each bucket?
3 for the page. You know, I said 3 to 5, so if it's 1 a bucket, that's fine too, however you want it. But what's on there that's not working, that you think's really important there be a conversation about? That would be another way you could frame it. I can text them. Want me to text them? Please promote Diane to presenter. All right. So, again, you'll be sharing your top 3 to 5. At first, we're just going to take your topics. If there needs to be a clarifying question to understand what that fellow counselor said, certainly we'll ask that, but we're not going to go into discussion quite yet. We're just going to get all of those top things recorded down, see where there's similarities, where there might be some outliers, just to help us concentrate some conversation. And definitely, you're welcome to give me your lists when we're done tonight. You're welcome to keep it yourself. My intention is that each one of us will have follow-up conversations with each one of you to go over that list more fully for things we don't get to tonight. Because some of them might be nuances about, or things that are just tailored to your working style and a staff member's working style versus procedural items, as an example. That might be things that would be appropriate for us to talk through and see if we can accommodate better for you. All right. So, hasn't happened yet, has it?
Yeah, I'm gonna go ask. Joseph, can you promote me to presenter? Push the other way. Look at that.
Oh, so much more effective than my texting him. All right, so Diane's going to share her screen so that everyone can see the words that are being given. And is there anyone who'd like to go first?
I'll throw one out. In the city council meetings category, we often see things on consent agenda that we really haven't discussed or been made aware of beforehand. And so it then leads to a lot of things being pulled from consent. So we can ask, why is that being replaced? And when is it being replaced? And what is that the best bid or whatever it is? But they're just,
So I'm going to stop you. It's consent agenda. You have questions about the consent agenda process?
Yes.
Okay.
There we go.
Are there others?
Has
Rachel?
not seen yet.
Are there others, Rachel?
That was the only one I was really,
That was the only one you felt strongly about that you wrote down?
no, that was the easiest one.
That was the easiest. You're welcome to share 3 to 5 of them if you have more
Okay.
that you want to share with the group.
On work sessions, sometimes the schedule is not constructed in a way to allow the time for, that council will need to discuss and ask questions without running into a 4-hour meeting at a work session. And I don't know if that's because we have lots of questions or because there's an expectation that council will sign off on something within a half hour of seeing it or 45 minutes, and there's 3 or 4 of those stacked together, and we end up having a 7:30, 8 o'clock meeting on work session nights. So I just have noticed that, and whether we should have more meetings or less on the agenda, or plan that it is a work session night goes to 8 o'clock. That's okay too, but it's just when it's not the plan, it gets awkward.
So I heard you're concerned about the scheduling and the length of the work sessions.
Well, just that the schedule tends to not give enough time to the topics that we're going to be discussing, and then it runs long. That's kind of how that's just my observation. It might not be accurate for others, or, and I'll put this out there. I put down, I'm sorry to be so impatient. I'm trying to work on myself. But, it's also important sometimes that we do have to rebut each other, whether it's me or others, because sometimes there'll be a statement made, and if you let it stand without saying, I don't really agree with that, or I don't think that will work, because it ends up being the statement of council. It ends up being the position of council without dialogue around it. So, it's not easy to say, hey, I really can't go there with this, or that really doesn't work for me, or you're not considering this, and maybe I've never said that as politely as that. But sometimes, an individual will, and that can include me all the time, will stake out some territory, and others are like, well, that doesn't speak for me, and that doesn't speak for us. But, it's awkward to not rebut it, and it's awkward to rebut it.
Is it the debate process, that there's maybe not consistency or clarity in the debate process at the council table?
I don't know, Sarah. It can happen at different times. Sometimes it's after a dialogue is just finished, and then there's a wrap-up comment, and it's like, well, wait a second, was that really what we all just finished talking about for the last half hour? Or is that now going further than that, or is that going less than that?
Okay. Thank you. Anything else you want to share today, Rachel?
Communication with the community, I had to put down that I feel it's very limited from council. It's really council member, at least for me personally, it's limited to council member comments at the table and people who either watch the show or you get reported in the paper later. My biggest communication is really with people I see at my other job. I don't get out late night or anything like that the way I used to. And so we don't do anything like a monthly column in the paper from council of what we're thinking about something, or council member interviews that could be set up with someone about a given topic, or we haven't created other venues for council communication with the community, I guess. I don't know what would be right or not, but, you know, I could see doing a half-hour GrassRoots TV show sometime about why we're taking housing so seriously, or, you know, something like that, you know, and we don't really have that more personal communication with a greater community or opportunities for it.
Anything else?
Nope, I already did enough.
Great. Who'd like to go next?
I'll go down a quick list here. Council work sessions. I think some topics could use more public input and interaction at our work sessions. But that kind of begs the which ones, when, and how. You know, we want to avoid 4 to 5 hour work session meetings. So just how to structure that so that it's meaningful input, I think is something that I think could work better for us in our work sessions. Communication between counselors, I was thinking about that, and you know, the only issue these days is a fear of touching on wrong subjects, serial meetings. You know, it just seems like recently there's been it's kind of more difficult, I think, to just have conversations outside of our meetings. And I think that those are very helpful. But I you know, for me personally, I'm, you know, I'll go get tacos with John sometime. And when we're sitting there, I'm like, I don't want to bring that. I don't want to talk. I don't want to talk about anything. Work, you know.
You're gonna sit there in silence and eat tacos.
It's just like basically, it's just like a difficult situation outside of.
Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't.
Yeah. Some, you know, anyway, but counselor communication, it just feels, there's some guardrails around it these days that are new for me to experience. Communication with the community, similar to kind of what Rachel was just saying, I could see us doing more press releases that update our community on items. And those press releases maybe could contain more council sentiment or statement in regards to issues that we're dealing with. And then when it comes to business processes, the thing that, you know, that I wrestle with every once in a while is not having a council policy around travel, training, and conferences.
Right. Anything else?
No, that's kind of the top of them.
Ward, go for it.
Before I fall asleep here in Maine, you know, I'm listening to the comments, and I think perhaps the thing that bothers me the most is that our work sessions and meetings are too long. That you get to 4 hours and over 3 hours, and it's difficult to stay focused. And the fact that the meetings are so long makes communication with other counselors, it's like, oh, geez, I just spent 5 hours with you last night. I don't want to talk to you again.
We won't take that personal, Ward.
No,
Although I do think we all shower.
Yeah, and I think it's difficult. I'm going to put this permission to speak freely.
Please.
That we should all feel that we can talk to each other about subjects that may be difficult for us, but it's important to put it out on the table so we can have these discussions. Like on council member comments that there should be a balance between focus on the current topic and off-topic extraneous conversations. Rachel is like Siri. She has all of the background information going back 20 or 30 years. And with all respect, Rachel, I don't want to hear about an election that took place 20 years ago. I think that extends the meeting beyond where they could be. And I say that with the utmost respect because of your vast knowledge and context and somehow finding a way to be brief and succinct for all of us. One thing I miss on work sessions is not having a roundtable discussion and brainstorming. It gets difficult for us to decide how are we going to get something on in a work session. And if we could have some roundtable discussions, we might be able to hash out some stuff without the cumbersome communications of text, emails, phone calls, and 3D meetings. I agree with Tori. I've never seen or known of a process for reimbursements, travel, training, or anything for council. I've just never seen that. And whenever I've wanted to get reimbursed for mileage, I just send Shannon, well, this is 31 miles. So that would help. And then really one thing that I think is really a glaring cumbersome is that we communicate with the community, but we don't know what each other have said. We don't have a log of emails. And how we do that without creating serial meetings, how we can do that and honor sunshine laws and open meeting laws, I don't know, but I think it's important that as we individually make inquiries to staff members for clarification, that each of the members should have the benefit of those communications. And I don't know how to do that, but I think it's cumbersome. I honor and respect all of my colleagues on council. I just don't want to spend as much time with you at meetings.
Well, am I the only one who needs to be more succinct, Ward?
No, I think we all do. Except John, because John very rarely speaks, so we got to get.
He says stuff, but he's very succinct.
I say stuff.
Master of succinction.
John is the ambassador of brevity.
The ambassador.
That's a good one.
The ombudsman of brevity.
Too, mister.
All right. Skippy, John, who wants to go?
I'll go ahead and go next. This might be a little bit different take than my other colleagues up here because, oh yeah. Admittedly, I'm the newest council member, so I have a slightly different viewpoint, but as far as city council meeting goes, I honestly think our council meetings work as well as they can be expected. We're 5 different human beings up here with 5 different life experiences, and I think, you know, we all bring something unique to the table. I agree with Ward and his comment about succinctness. I think it does actually apply to all of us at certain times. I value what Rachel brings to the table, and I'm really glad she's part of this team. What else? I think our processes, I don't have any problems with any of the processes. I think they're all fairly well dialed, and if I ever have a question with one, I ask staff and they give me an answer very quickly, and I don't know, it's, I think it's very user-friendly. I think we run a tight ship. The biggest issue I think that we could do better at is communication with the community. But that said, I honestly think that our city government communicates better with the city than any, I've lived in a lot of places. And I think our city government communicates with the general public better than any other place I've ever lived. So I don't really have anything negative to say. Sorry.
Sorry, none of it's negative, it's all constructive.
That's right.
Okay.
This is a constructive exercise, for sure.
That's right.
Thank you, John. Skippy.
Okay. First one, this between us, so council meetings and work sessions, I just think there's a lack of genuine give and take in our discussions. I think we could really improve on that.
Does everyone know what that means? Is there any clarifying questions around that? Because that's a little vague even to me.
So I was trying to keep it brief for you. I can explain
Is
it
it
a bit more.
similar to what Ward's point was?
I would like to see, I think we would benefit from more genuine, constructive debate where we're, to your point, it's not awkward for you to push back on something, it's welcome. I really want to learn this alternative perspective. I come here to really learn from the collective and come to a new understanding, as opposed to what I think we do most of the time, which is sort of 4 individual statements at staff, and then that's it. I think that more of that give and take is really the magic of how we create something better than the sum of its parts.
Excuse me, Skippy, just so to get a better understanding, would you, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but would that fall in the category of consensus building?
Yeah, it leads right into my next point, which is around that, yes. Ward saw it, but then the next one is, I think we, not that we never hit it, sometimes we do, but we lack a clear process of consensus building where all of us leave each discussion with a clear understanding of what the end decision was, with acceptance of it, even if we don't agree with it. Really each of us individually feeling heard in that discussion.
Any other clarifying questions on that one? Okay, keep going.
3, alluded to in a few other comments, this is both between us, but also in the meetings, just the mood, the feeling in the room. I sense a lot of fear, right? Fear of saying the wrong thing, of stepping on a legal wire, fear of being in the fishbowl and in the newspaper, but also I hear it from, public commenters, God, I get in the room and it's so uncomfortable to sit in that seat. And I think we can improve the mood and we would improve the outcomes because we want people to be able to really speak their free truth uninhibited of that.
Small little side note here, we really haven't put any art or decoration or plants or anything that says Aspen in this room, other than the flags.
Yeah.
And the old City Hall had the picture of City Hall or the old town and, had a number of things that, the old room had a number of things that made it feel a little human, even though it was just a basement room.
Yeah, that's right.
Map of Aspen will look really cool in here.
Yeah, we got some good ones around.
Yeah, I know. I really like those 3D ones.
4, I don't know if this is shared. I would really appreciate more diversity of whether you call it feedback or testimony or perspective from as we're reviewing things in council meetings. I'd love to see kind of expert testimony on different sides of issues come forward. I think there's room to kind of fill out the information set we get from people that at least know more than I do.
Can you give an example?
I was just thinking what that would look like.
Or even just pick a topic. What kind of topic are you talking about there?
Can you let me think about that as we move forward in the meeting and come back to it? Yeah, it deserves a good example. Okay, and then the last one, the public comment. Just the time and the format of it is just, it doesn't serve the public. The idea of I've got to wait until the 5th hour of a meeting to be heard, I just think is just really out of date. whether, some solution so that we can meet people where they are, whether they record their video and they upload it and we can watch it at the meeting, whether they get the text message 5 minutes before their time is up. People are working, they're doing other things, they're with kids. It feels very unwelcoming.
But isn't,
Can I follow up on that with a question? Are you suggesting that perhaps public hearings be higher in the agenda?
That's one potential solution. I'm not saying I know exactly what the solution is. I think there's a few things that come to mind that could work. But the example in my life recently, having to call a bunch of, whether it's Verizon or whatever, I used to have to wait on the phone for 2 hours while I tried to manage my day. Now they just say, press 1 and we'll call you back when we're ready, right? There's just kind of, easy solutions to make it more approachable for people.
I can agree with that, and I'd like to look at ways to do it, but at the same time, at some level, public comment is supposed to be after they've heard the issue presented in the dialogue. And if they've pre-recorded before they've heard half the answers asked, or if you're just texting you to call in and say what you already thought and that you didn't have to hear the meeting for an hour, that's like saying, let's just draw battle lines and I'll line up regardless of what modifications or changes were made or information came out in the hearing.
Yeah, that's a totally fair point. I guess I question how many people, and maybe this is another issue to work on, but I question how many people come in to listen to the whole meeting and then come up with they have to say. I think most people do come in with a fairly set opinion that they want to advocate for. Maybe that's a bad thing, but it's a good point.
Although we've seen examples recently where people come in and make comments and it turns out they don't know they haven't even read the newspaper article about it the day before.
For sure.
My concern about that, and I like the idea of making public comment more accessible, but at the same time, I think public comment should be done publicly.
Yeah.
And when you allow the opportunity to pre-record messages, if an issue that concerned a lot of money came up, somebody who wanted this issue to pass could put out a request for dozens and dozens of people to pre-record messages.
Yeah, and maybe that's not a bad thing either, right? I don't know.
I'm sure, I'm just pointing out that that's where that path.
We won't solve that.
We're not going to solve it.
This gets into a very interesting debate we're going to have at a future session about the core values of democracy.
I think that's totally fair, and I don't have a solution here, but the point I'm just bringing forward is I think I see it as a cumbersome, outdated method, the way we do public comment.
Can I add one I didn't read because it's just like yours? Sometimes agenda, this is council meetings, could be modified so that staff can leave sooner or that the large public groups don't have to wait for hours for their issue. So the same sort of thought about how to move it up to do that, but thank you.
If I'd like to add that we just keep an open mind about everything, and maybe we can we don't have to start the meetings in the afternoon unless we can't make it work in our schedules, but staff works all day long and then they have to come to a city council meeting or work session. So the BOCC meets earlier in the day. Just be able to be flexible to at least consider different solutions. And I want to comment too on Skippy. I think Skippy made a point that is lacking, is that the ability for people, city council members, to offer alternative takes, red team, blue team. I think that's really important. I think we, even if you don't believe the counter argument, but to at least make it and throw it out there. I think I've called this in the past, poking holes in arguments, but doing that without getting defensive, listening to divergent ideas with an open mind, with patience.
Yeah, agreed. A robust, informed discussion in a safe space.
Anything else, Skippy?
Not in my top 5.
All right. So it's interesting. I'm trying really hard to leave my city manager hat off. Why are the meetings so long?
Well, we talk a lot, and we have a lot of work that we do.
We have a lot of work that we do.
And there's a few number of meetings. I mean, probably not relative to other communities, but relative to the work we have to do.
Well, and we can't predict the future. We don't know how we're going to approach it or how long it's going to take. We never know.
That is a disappointing truism. We didn't do that. We can't predict the future. Can we work on that? Any soothsayers around?
Again, I think sometimes these are very complex topics, and we're presented with staff work and a solution or a path. And staff may have spent hours getting to that place and understanding and knowing why it's the best one, and then they want us to know and understand and accept it in 25 minutes. And that's hard, that's where the questions come in about these sort of things. And that, again, relates in my mind to sometimes consent calendar, when things are pulled from consent calendar. It's because we haven't seen them before. Why do we have to replace that? And what's wrong with this machine or that program? And have you tried to replace it with something else? I mean, we're going to ask those questions because we haven't seen it before on consent calendar. And consent calendar generally means manager's seen it, she's signed off on it, it should be all okay, but we haven't seen it before. Maybe a memo about those things before, but even reading through the memos, when there are big dollars involved, people are going to want to ask questions. So I think that is part of it. And then part of it is that when you have 5 people on any given topic, if they each do 5 minutes each, you're talking 25 minutes on that topic. And that's even, even constrained and separate from the staff presentation on it. If each person just does 3 minutes, it's 15 plus a staff presentation. So are we allowing enough time for the complex subjects, or are we having too many on one agenda?
May I share one liner note on that? The risk of ironically extending this meeting with comfort. For me personally, just in my experience, it cuts both ways. I both have the experience sometime of leaving a meeting that's gone really long and feeling like I was not mentally present for the last thing at hour 7. And sometimes we'll have 10 things in the consent agenda, and I feel the pressure not to pull things or ask more questions because I know that it's going to push them out. And so I can leave the same meeting feeling like it's been too long, I didn't show up great, and I didn't actually weigh in as much as I wanted to.
I'm chiming in here on, are we as a council micromanaging? Do we need to address all the issues that we're addressing? Can we be more concise? That's just a question. I certainly don't have the answer, but.
Any other thoughts on this?
RAFTA does a really good job when they run their meetings. They have a time schedule. I have never seen that in Aspen City Council meetings in I don't know how many years. I don't know if Rachel's seen it. Maybe the VOCC does it, but to have to stay on a schedule, to stay on topic, RAFTA does a really good job of that.
So the rapid transit meeting orientation.
CoA does that too.
And APSHA, for that matter.
Is a long time ago, but I had a council colleague who once said, how much time do we waste with jokes? How long does a laugh take? How many times in the course of a meeting do we lose 25 minutes for a minute worth of jokes?
Yeah.
Sure.
Which
I'm
also.
not saying that, but I've had it asked before at my very first council.
Reasonable question, and also intersects with the alternative goal or interrelated goal of creating mood set and comfort.
Human
experience.
Is there anything else anyone wants to say on sort of what's cumbersome or outdated or clunky, not working well right now? Anything anyone else wants to share today?
I thought of an example for Tori.
Okay.
I think item number F is going pretty well.
Others going well.
Tori, just an example, doing work in the core, whether it's, building IQ and benchmarking or affordable housing mitigation. Could we get not just someone to come in and speak to what the benefit is for the environment of doing those things or how many housing units we could deliver, but could somebody come in from the business community and say, hey, this is how much the rent's going to go up and this is the resulting increase in prices for the food that we're going to serve, and that's going to be the negative impact to the community, right? Just these differing, when we have trade-offs, people who speak from the perspective of, kind of each of these naturally competing interests. Kind of what I mean.
Thank you. Okay, so where I'm going to go from this is Diane and I are going to spend some time with this list and sort of organize it into focus areas, and then check back in on what might be low hanging, and also have those one-on-one conversations with you too.
Okay.
What I don't hear quite yet is coalescing on any particular item being of high importance and immediate importance. So we'll continue to work on this, sort of saying what is a process to get you there, and start putting some timelines to that.
For what it's worth, Sarah, just because we don't hear what we don't say, there were a majority of the things said by my fellow council members that I have written down as non-top 5. So there may be similar coalescing on their sheets.
Yep, we'll talk about them all definitely
Okay.
further. So it's going to be a similar exercise on the back about what's effective, what's slick, what's working, what are you happy with in these same areas. So we'll just take 719, we'll go to 724.
At the last CML, one of the sessions that I went to was a discussion about this and with this. And had a panel of 5, maybe a mayor and council members, and it was facilitated. I forget the gentleman's name, but he also did the main presentation on day 2, I think, the lunchtime presentation or whatever. And the conversation in that room was hot. Like, the people were airing out their grievances with working with their council. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe, the amount of stories or accounts that somebody, because it was audience participation. So people in the audience would be like, we have this guy, right?
That's quite common when you
Make you feel
have.
better about your board?
coalescing council.
Lot.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I was really surprised. And even in our own valley, we have, there are councils that are in our own valley that have very difficult relationships. I'll just say it like that.
So I'll try to give it about 1 more minute.
Diane, did you take a class to be such a good scribe?
This is not a skill I'm
You're working hard over there. I see that.
This is way more than I asked her to do.
Little
but
beads of
it's
sweat,
awesome. I'm
little
not
beads of
getting
sweat
away.
coming
See,
down.
Not having to rewatch it. And not that I don't want to see you all again, but.
But you'd rather be in Maine?
She loved me. I went to school there.
You did?
You did?
Undergrad.
Oh, neat.
Where, Bowdoin?
No, that's a safety school.
Oh. What does that mean? I'm sorry?
It's a rival.
Oh.
Safety school means like they got it.
I mean, she's too smart for that.
Back up, yeah. It's a school that.
I couldn't hear that, Diane. You went to school in Maine?
She did.
Sorry, Amy didn't tell me to use my mic.
She was, you just couldn't hear her.
Sorry, I
She was
couldn't hear
yelling.
her. I went to undergrad Bates College. And yes, and I did.
It's Colby Bowden.
I did call John asked if I went to Bowdoin. I said, that's a safety school.
Well, a lot of my in-laws went to Bowden.
Same.
Well, it's all. I liked it. On that.
Let's jump over to what is working well, or feels slick and is delivering what you need in your roles. Anyone want to go first?
I'll run through mine real quickly, if you don't mind. Council meetings, we have had some light agendas. That's what's effective and slick. When we have those, this council has not really dealt with as many land use applications as previous councils I've sat on. So we've really been fortunate in that area. City council work sessions, I think our memos and our prep for our work sessions has been really great. I think that the more information we have ahead of time, the better, and I think that it's been really, really well done. And staff shows up extremely well prepared for the discussion that we have. Communication between counselors as a topic here, I wrote here that we are 5 independent voices. I noticed that we come with a different lens and a different perspective often, and not afraid to share those viewpoints. And I think that is actually good for our communication, and that is effective. As Rachel was saying, that sometimes we do need to be taken to task and questioned on our viewpoints, and I don't see anybody afraid of doing that. Our communication with the community, I believe that we are all very accessible, very responsive. And I made a note here about time on the street. I noticed that some of the greatest interactions that I have and ability to connect with the community are those in-person, on the street opportunities that I get, and I think those are really effective. And when I say that, I think of Rachel, who is at her job place and gets approached, and that may not be as effective, or slick. But really just truly time on the street. And I do know that, a lot of people know that Rachel is at work somewhere where they may run into her, and they love that.
What kind of cheese would you like? More parking cheese.
Yes. And we just ran out.
And that's just my
Thank you.
short list.
Anyone else?
I'll go next. As far as, I want to reiterate what Tori said. This is on my list. Our packets are very well written and thorough, and that definitely helps the work I do. Communication between counselors. I'm very happy with counselor communications. I'm fond of each of my teammates here at this table. You too, Ward. I have each of them on speed dial, and I reach out to each and every one of them very frequently, at least once a week. I'm very proud of our accomplishments with tremendous staff support that we've made in the short time I've been on council. We're making positive steps towards maintaining our community and positive steps toward reducing our impacts on the environment. Other communities look up to us.
Very good.
Thank you.
I'll go in. On council meetings, I said items are brought to us that reflect need or ongoing issues, and that we are broadcasting on GrassRoots, Facebook Live, and Zoom access for people, which is an access that didn't exist 2 years ago, or the Facebook Live, I guess, maybe 3 years ago. So those are main points. On the city council work sessions, I think there also is getting the topics prioritized and to us in a timely fashion. But most importantly is willingness by staff to take our feedback and modify and continue to work on things. So that's, a very important element, that there's give and take between us and staff. And hopefully for us to understand when they say we just can't do it this way or that fast, or what you're thinking, and for us to be able to accept that, or for staff to say, hey, that's a good idea, and some of this work is bringing up good ideas. I think our communications between council are often casual conversations or more relationship related, and they're non-quasi judicial, which can be very helpful, of course. Always, never. And then on communications with the community, I did put down that staff meetings with our community outside of City Hall and outside of the formal meetings, and gathering input is really well received by our community, and it's very helpful. So it's not necessarily just us communicating with the community, but it doesn't matter how many or who, but every one of our staff members in every department will be out there working with the community. And I think that really matters as much as us on the street. And, it does lead me to think about, are there ways to create more casual interactions with the public? I mean, we do the one big community picnic, but we sometimes see the police do pizza in the park to kind of meet and develop relationships, and maybe we could find some more informal and more casual and not $15,000, $20,000 production gatherings that we could, just be open house, open to questions, open venue. And then under business processes, I said all staff is very helpful, and Shannon is great.
Mm-hmm. She is.
She is.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Ward or Skippy?
I didn't know if Ward wanted to go before bedtime.
Go ahead, Skippy.
Okay. So this is both for council meetings and work sessions, but just legal guidance. I think, Jim and Kate are just unbelievable team, like implicit trust, super clear all the time with the public and with us offline. I have just the most appreciation for our legal team. Yeah. Second, outcomes. You know, despite the imperfection of process, we're getting a lot of shit done, and that feels really good. Communication between counselors. One-to-one relationship building. And this is something that I think John has taught me so much about in very short order. You know, you have really, in my view, really invested in each and every one of us, and I see the trust and teamwork that builds, and I think a lot of our success in the last year is a result of that work. And so I've been trying to model you, but I think it's been really great. Same bucket, mutual respect and belief in one another. Even when I just personally may disagree with the approach or the philosophy, I know all four of you guys are in this totally for the right reasons, are super invested in community, like work your butt off. And I just immensely appreciate that. And I feel that back from you to me. And I see it between all of us. I think that's a really big one. I don't want to pick one more. Can I pick two more? I'm picking two more.
Let's just keep rolling.
Okay. The last one in between counselors, I think self-awareness and self-work. You know, Rachel recently, like that, coming forward with the apology and the work, it's evident. It really is there. I see that also. I mean, I was going to actually say this separately, Sarah, but from the review, like it is so clear that you have listened to feedback and are really stepping into the role of like guiding the conversation more and asking hard questions. And it's just awesome. Like people are really taking feedback and doing the individual work to show up better for the team. I think that's amazing. And then the last one, the communication with the community. Just the investment of time and money is immense. We really care about this individually and organizationally. I don't think in like entrepreneur parlance, I don't think we found product market fit. I think we're throwing a lot of money and time in and we're not necessarily getting the result, but we really care. Would be shocked if any of us is working for less than minimum wage and just about every time we can, or for more than minimum wage. And every time we can, we invest in public outreach. So we really want to get it. We just got to nail that product market fit. Yeah.
Thank you. Ward, do you have anything you want to add today?
Yeah, as far as the city council meetings are concerned, I think there's really substantial alignment for the five of us on what we want to do, where we want to go. And I'm really proud of the courage to get stuff done. We're biting off some big stuff. We're taking some heat for it, but I think we all feel that this is that where we're going is what's best for the community. And so I'm proud of us, all of us, for that. I think the video broadcasts on city council meetings, I remember the first time there was a televised or taped city council meeting, and the mayor at the time was apoplectic. But now the thought of not having televised and video tapes to go back at for the public to look at, the transparency of our government, I'm really proud of that. For work sessions, I really appreciate that we'll have a work session. And like John said, our packets are so well prepared. All our staff is so knowledgeable and their ability to communicate is really at a very high level. But it's really good when we give direction to staff. It comes back to us in the future as action items. And so it's that to me is really good. The comms, council to council, I think I can do better at that, but I think that when I talk with or email or text, that we all really get along and we can share our ideas. We can agree to disagree. I listened to John. He made a comment at the end of the meeting last night that I should put more sunscreen on. So when I got in my kayak today, I put sunscreen on. So I value John's direction.
You don't look quite as red tonight either.
You look good.
Yeah, I wasn't on the water as much. The rollers were getting big, so I got off the ocean. Communication with the public is and the community. That's sometimes I think. Again, John hit on this. Is that sometimes it's really disappointing the lack of knowledge that some people in the community have. I really feel it with letters to the editor. I just want to say, well, we've tried that. That didn't work, or let's talk, but you don't have a way to get in touch with them. But I've heard a number of times how appreciative people are and really are somewhat surprised that we do reply to emails. I spend hours responding to emails. And as I know the rest of you do, and I think Skippy is probably the most connected person and
really dislike
sociable and
if I do it.
probably has more meetings than the rest of us combined. But those are my high points. Yeah, that covers it, I think.
Great, thank you, Ward. So the reason I asked this about what's working well as well is because there's processes you clearly like. And so figuring out how to use some of the characteristics of those processes and those interactions to help address some of the things you gave me that weren't going well. We'll go back at the staff side and spend some time, again, piecing this together and using this as a launch point for those conversations in the manager's office.
Diane, on mine about the investment of time and money, communication with the public and the good one, also organizationally, not just from council members, like.
Say that one more time, on this last one here?
On that last one, yeah, not just council members, but also organizationally, from a staff level, from a consultant level, a project level, all of it.
Okay, so I see a number of you are packing up, so is that we are not going to complete the other part of this exercise tonight? Is that what you're telling me? I could use some clarity in your communication, because right now I only have your body language.
You got dinner for us downstairs? I think it's quoted 20 to 8.
That is.
I have a dinner at 6 o'clock.
No,
It's 9:39 and I haven't had dinner.
Yeah, no, we'll continue.
9:39 for Ward.
Yeah.
Sarah, what time,
I would rather
where are we?
know, I can tell right now it's not time to start this other conversation
Okay.
in the group.
This feels long.
All right.
About who is or how to be the ideal council member.
Yeah.
Well, it's giving you some background about how this material was developed as well. And so I don't sense the council's prepared for that now.
I would agree. And thank you for providing, maybe we can read it on our own time and prepare.
What is Sarah, when we started talking about this a year ago or what have you, we saw some examples, I think you shared some examples with us from some other cities, kind of a manual, if you will. Are we working towards something like that? Like, what are we going to do with this process?
Well, at minimum, I've recommended that the council update its rules or regulations from the 2005 resolution. And so I still think at minimum you need to do that. I'm continuing to prepare the new council member orientation materials that will cover a lot of these things. So whether the other council members wishes to use it is certainly will be up to them.
So onboarding book, if you will, for council members, are we, because one of those things that you shared with us was like this thick, it might have included the history of this. I mean, I'm just wondering, those materials, do you remember what I'm talking about? Some of those?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's, this is council's project. So we should be clear about that. This is council's project. So the outcome of it will be what council establishes for it. I've made the recommendation to you of what the minimum needs to be for my view.
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot more you could do to be more effective and more welcoming when you have new elected officials join your group.
Yeah.
But that's really going to be your call.
I'd like to chime in here for a minute. I think I visualize this as a legacy that we pass on. Sarah said it's been 18 years since we've done this, and I think now is the right time to do it when we have a council that's worked together for a year, and if we wait until another election, we might have different council members, and we have people have to be up to speed that have to have gone through a bunch of meetings before they can identify what the process and the answers to the question that Sarah has presented us with. So I think now is the time to do it, and that it's what we're passing on as a legacy to the future councils to come. That's redundant, isn't it? Future to come.
Do we have this on our work sessions schedule, our next?
No, it's one of the things I had listed for discussion for next time the council's willing to talk about is how you wanted to proceed.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to drag this on because I think we want to go, but I prepped for this and wrote down some thoughts about that question. What does this lead to? What are the outcomes? And I'd love to share.
All right. People are packed. People are ready to go. We should try to schedule a part 2.
Yeah.
As soon as possible.
Yeah, I think this is super important work. This is the work that when we get this right, it makes everything else we want to do more effective, more enjoyable, and it'll do it for those who come after us too.
Well, and I think since we have a fairly cohesive council right now, Ward's point is well taken. Now would be a good time to do it instead of waiting.
Agreed.
All right.
Let's noodle on it.
I would love noodles.
Go have dinner, Ward.
Good night.
Night. Thank you, Ward.
Ciao, y'all.
Ciao, y'all.
Sarah, thanks for getting
Ciao.
this process.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for wearing the other hat, Sarah. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Grassroots. We are back next week, Monday, for a work session at 4 p.m. and then a regularly scheduled meeting at 5 p.m.
On Tuesday.
on Tuesday.
Bye.
Thanks, Amy.
Ciao for now.
Thank you.